Welcome. I'm Magnus, and I bring you horror stories to help you relax, or maybe to keep you up at night. Tell us where you're from. Are there spooky forests nearby? If you're a fan of scary stories, subscribe and drop a like. Get cozy, and let's begin. My name is Declan Mercer. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. The trip to Alabama wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a weekend getaway with my girlfriend Naomi and our friends, Elliot and Vera. We'd been dating for almost 2 years, and I'd been feeling that familiar itch to do something different, something exciting. When Elliot mentioned he'd found an abandoned fire lookout tower in the Talladega National Forest that we could camp in, it seemed like the perfect adventure. The drive from Nashville took about 4 hours, with the landscape gradually shifting from rolling hills to the dense, ancient forests of northern Alabama. I remember how the trees seemed to close in around us as we followed the increasingly narrow dirt roads, our SUV bouncing over ruts and fallen branches. Cell service had disappeared an hour ago, but Elliot insisted he had downloaded the directions. "Trust me," he kept saying, his eyes glued to the offline map on his phone. "This place is going to be epic." The tower appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, a skeletal structure of weathered metal rising above the forest canopy like some forgotten monument. It stood at least 60 feet tall, with a small cabin perched at the top, its windows dark and vacant. A strange silence fell over our group as we parked and stepped out of the car. There was something unsettling about the tower's silhouette against the late afternoon sky, but I chalked it up to the natural eeriness that comes with abandoned places. "Are we sure this is safe?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared up at the rusted stairs that zigzagged up the side of the tower. She had always been the cautious one in our relationship, but I was too caught up in the thrill of exploration to really hear the concern in her voice. Instead, I grabbed my backpack from the trunk and slung it over my shoulder, already imagining the view from the top. Elliot was the first to approach the tower, running his hand along one of the support beams and giving it a shake. "Solid as a rock," he declared, though the slight tremor in the structure suggested otherwise. Vera had already begun taking photos, her camera clicking rapidly as she captured the tower from different angles. "This is going to make an amazing Instagram post," she said, and I remember thinking how out of place those words sounded in the heavy silence of the forest. The climb up to the cabin was more harrowing than any of us had anticipated. The metal steps were narrow and slick with moss, and several were missing entirely, forcing us to stretch over gaping holes with our heavy packs, throwing off our balance. About halfway up, I glanced down and felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. The forest floor seemed impossibly far away, and our vehicle was just a small patch of color among the endless green. I gripped the railing tighter and continued upward. The cabin at the top was a single room, about 15 feet square, with large windows on all sides that once allowed fire spotters to scan the horizon for smoke. Most of the glass was intact, though dirt and grime had turned it nearly opaque in places. The interior was sparse, a few broken pieces of furniture, an old metal desk bolted to the floor, and a surprising amount of debris for a place so high up. It smelled of rust and decay and something else I couldn't quite identify, something organic and vaguely sweet. As we set up our sleeping bags and unpacked our supplies, I noticed Naomi examining some markings on the wall near the desk. "Hey, check this out," she called, and we gathered around to look. Someone had carved a series of symbols into the wooden panel, not graffiti or initials, but deliberate patterns that looked almost like a primitive language. Elliot laughed it off as the work of bored teenagers or previous campers, but I saw the way Naomi's fingers lingered over the marks, tracing their outlines with a troubled expression. By the time we finished setting up, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees and bathing the cabin in an amber glow. We sat in a circle on the floor, passing around a bottle of whiskey and sharing ghost stories that suddenly felt too real in our isolated perch. Through the windows, I could see the darkness gathering in the forest below us, thick and impenetrable. And as night fell completely, the strange sounds began, rustlings and creaks that could have been the wind or the tower settling, but somehow seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic, like something moving steadily upward. Sleep came fitfully that first night. I kept waking to the sound of the tower groaning in the wind, metal contracting in the cold night air. Each time I opened my eyes, I'd check on Naomi beside me, her breathing steady despite the uncomfortable conditions. During one of these wakeful moments, I noticed Elliot sitting up by the window, his silhouette stark against the faint moonlight, perfectly still as he stared out into the darkness. "Can't sleep?" I whispered, careful not to wake the others. He didn't respond immediately, and when he finally turned toward me, his face was hidden in shadow. "Something's out there," he said flatly. "Been watching it move between the trees for about an hour now." I crawled over to the window, my sleeping bag tangled around my legs, and peered out into the night. At first, I saw nothing but the vague outlines of treetops swaying gently in the breeze. Then, a movement caught my eye, something large shifting in the clearing near our vehicle. I strained to make it out, but it remained just beyond the range of clear visibility, a darker patch of darkness. Morning brought no answers, just a heavy mist that clung to the forest and obscured the ground below our tower. We ate a cold breakfast, no one wanting to risk a fire in our enclosed space. The mood was subdued, with Elliot uncharacteristically quiet about whatever he thought he had seen. When he finally spoke, it was to announce that he wanted to explore some of the surrounding area. "There's supposed to be an old ranger station about 2 miles east of here," he said, studying the map on his phone. "Might be worth checking out." The decision split our group. Vera insisted on staying behind to capture the fog with her camera, and Naomi wanted to rest after a poor night's sleep. That left Elliot and me to make the hike. As we descended the tower stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, not just from the cabin above where the girls remained, but from somewhere within the dense wall of trees that surrounded us. The forest seemed different in the daylight, not the peaceful sanctuary I had expected, but something alert and aware. Our path through the woods quickly became difficult to follow. The trails were overgrown, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath fallen trees and thick underbrush. Elliot moved with increasing determination, checking his phone regularly despite the lack of signal. "It should be right over this ridge," he kept saying, but each ridge only revealed more endless forest. After an hour of hiking, I realized we hadn't heard a single bird call or animal sound. The woods were unnaturally silent except for our own labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath our boots. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, we stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood not the ranger station we had been searching for, but another lookout tower, identical to the one we were staying in, down to the rusted staircase and weathered cabin at the top. Elliot stopped so abruptly that I nearly collided with him. "This isn't right," he muttered, pulling out his phone again and squinting at the screen. "The map doesn't show another tower here." Something about the second tower filled me with dread. While our tower had felt abandoned, this one felt occupied despite its similarly dilapidated state. I found myself speaking in a hushed voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "Let's head back," I suggested, but Elliot was already moving toward the structure with the same curiosity that had drawn us to the first tower. I followed reluctantly, unable to articulate even to myself why I wanted so badly to return to Naomi and Vera. At the base of the second tower, Elliot discovered a small metal box attached to one of the support beams. It was locked, but the rust had weakened the mechanism, and with some effort, he managed to pry it open. Inside was a single item, a logbook bound in cracked leather, its pages yellow with age. Elliot flipped through it eagerly, scanning the entries. "The last entry is from 1973, he said, excitement evident in his voice. "Some guy named Marcus Thorne. Says he was transferred here after the other tower was decommissioned following an incident." The word incident hung in the air between us, and I felt a sudden, irrational urge to grab the logbook and throw it as far into the woods as possible. Instead, I watched as Elliot carefully tucked it into his backpack. "Naomi and Vera need to see this," he said, and for once, I agreed that we should return to the tower immediately. As we turned to go, a sound drifted through the trees, faint but distinct, like metal scraping against metal, coming from the direction of our tower. We ran most of the way back, the silence of the forest now broken by our pounding footsteps and ragged breathing. The sound we had heard didn't repeat, but its memory drove us forward with increasing urgency. When our tower finally came into view through the trees, I felt a momentary relief, until I realized that something was wrong. The SUV's doors were all open, belongings scattered around it, as if someone had been searching frantically through our supplies. "Naomi!" I shouted, all thoughts of being quiet forgotten as I sprinted toward the tower. "Vera!" Elliot was right behind me, calling out his girlfriend's name with increasing desperation. No answer came from above. We took the stairs two at a time, the metal structure swaying alarmingly beneath our combined weight and speed. I nearly fell when my foot went through a rotted step, catching myself at the last second on the rusted railing, the metal edge slicing into my palm. The cabin was empty. Naomi and Vera's sleeping bags were still there, along with their backpacks and Vera's camera, but the women themselves were gone. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I picked up Naomi's phone from where it lay on her pillow, the screen cracked, but still displaying the last photo she had taken. A blurry image of something tall and thin standing just outside one of the dirty windows, the details obscured by the glass and distance. "They wouldn't have just wandered off," Elliot said, his voice tight with worry as he paced the small space. "Not without their stuff. Not without telling us." He was right, and we both knew it. Something had happened while we were gone, something that had caused the women to leave the relative safety of the tower in a hurry. Or maybe they hadn't left willingly at all. The thought sent ice through my veins as I remembered the ransacked car below. We decided to search the surrounding area, agreeing to stay within shouting distance of each other. The forest seemed to close in around me as I moved between the trees, calling Naomi's name until my voice grew hoarse. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made me jump, my imagination populating the woods with unseen threats. After an hour of fruitless searching, I returned to the tower to find Elliot already waiting, his face drawn and pale. "I found this," he said quietly, holding out his hand. In his palm was a delicate silver bracelet, the one Vera never took off, a gift from her mother. It was smeared with something dark that I didn't want to identify. It was hooked on a branch about half a mile west, like she'd caught it while running. The implication hung in the air between us. Running from what? As the afternoon wore on with no sign of the women, we debated our options. The rational choice was to hike out to the nearest road and find help. But that would mean leaving the tower, our only landmark and the place Naomi and Vera would return to if they could. In the end, we decided that Elliot would stay while I took the SUV and went for help. The keys were still in the ignition where we'd left them, though the interior of the vehicle had been thoroughly disturbed. The drive down the narrow forest road was a nightmare of paranoia and growing darkness. Twice I had to stop to clear fallen branches from the path, and each time I stepped out of the vehicle, I felt exposed and vulnerable. The forest seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. When I finally reached the main road, I almost wept with relief, until I tried to start the car again and heard only the click of a dead battery. The headlights I had left on to illuminate the dark road had drained it completely. I was stranded as night fell, miles from the tower, and with no way to contact Elliot or the authorities. In desperation, I began walking along the road, hoping to flag down a passing car, but traffic was non-existent on this remote stretch of highway. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. I stepped into the road, waving my arms frantically. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed as it approached, and I felt a surge of hope. The truck stopped beside me, and the driver lowered his window. He was an older man with deeply lined skin and eyes that seemed to reflect no light. "You look lost, son," he said, his Alabama accent thick and drawling. I quickly explained my situation, the abandoned tower, the missing women, the dead battery. With each word, his expression grew more troubled. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment before speaking. "That tower's been abandoned since the 60s. After what happened to those forest rangers." He shook his head slowly. "No one goes up there anymore. No one who knows the stories, anyway." The old man introduced himself as Ray Colburn, a lifelong resident of the area. He offered me a ride to the local sheriff's office, and I climbed gratefully into his truck, the heat from the vents thawing my frozen fingers. As we drove through the darkness, Ray told me about the towers, not just the two we had found, but a network of them built throughout the forest in the early 1900s. They were for spotting fires, he explained, but some folks say they had another purpose too. Something to do with tracking what moves through those woods at night. My skin crawled as I remembered the shadowy figure Elliot had seen from our window. "What moves through the woods?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Ray's eyes never left the road as he spoke. Back in 1967, there was an incident. 5 forest rangers disappeared from the western tower, your tower, over the course of 3 months. The official report blamed it on a grizzly attack, but there ain't been grizzlies in these parts for 100 years. He paused, then added quietly, "My brother was one of those rangers. The only one they ever found parts of." The sheriff's office was a small building in an equally small town called Oak Ridge. Despite the late hour, the lights were on, and 2 patrol cars sat in the parking lot. Ray walked in with me, nodding to the deputy at the front desk. "Clem, this fella's got friends missing up by the old fire towers," he said, and something in his tone made the deputy straighten immediately. Sheriff Dawson was a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She listened to my story without interruption, making notes on a pad of paper. When I mentioned the second tower and the logbook Elliot had found, she exchanged a look with Ray that I couldn't interpret. "We'll organize a search party at first light," she said finally. "It's too dangerous to go into those woods at night. You're welcome to join us, but I strongly advise against trying to return there on your own." But Elliot was still up there, alone in the tower, waiting for me to return with help. The thought of him spending the entire night by himself, surrounded by whatever had taken Naomi and Vera, was unbearable. "I can't wait until morning," I insisted. "My friend is still at the tower. He's alone." Sheriff Dawson's expression didn't change, but her voice softened slightly. "Mr. Mercer, I understand your concern, but I've lost good officers in those woods after dark. Whatever took your friends?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's most active at night. Going back there now would be suicide." Despite my protests, the sheriff was adamant. She offered me a cot in one of the empty cells for the night, and exhausted, I eventually accepted. Sleep was impossible, though. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with images of Naomi and Vera lost in the dark forest, of Elliot alone in that decaying tower. When I did drift off, my dreams were filled with twisted metal structures reaching toward the sky, their stairways leading not up to lookout cabins, but down into the earth, into places where no light had ever reached. I was awakened before dawn by Sheriff Dawson herself, already dressed in heavy outdoor gear. "Search party's ready," she said briskly. "We've got 4 deputies, 2 forest rangers, and Ray insisted on coming too. Says he knows those woods better than anyone." Outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as a gray dawn approached. The group that had assembled looked serious and well-prepared, with rifles and heavy-duty flashlights. One of the deputies handed me a high-visibility vest and a canteen of water. The drive back to where I had left the SUV was tense and mostly silent. I sat in Sheriff Dawson's cruiser, watching the forest glide past the windows, looking more innocent in the early morning light than it had the previous night. When we reached my vehicle, one of the deputies quickly jump-started it, and I was instructed to lead the convoy the rest of the way to the tower. The forest road seemed less threatening with a line of vehicles behind me, their headlights cutting through the lingering mist. As we approached the clearing where the tower stood, an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. The structure looked different somehow, more decrepit than I remembered, as if it had aged decades overnight. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up beside me, and she rolled down her window. "Is that it?" she asked, squinting up at the tower. I nodded, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The cabin at the top was barely visible through the morning fog, but I could see that the door was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The climb up to the cabin felt longer than before, each step heavy with anticipation and fear. Sheriff Dawson insisted on going first, her hand resting on the holster at her hip. I followed close behind, with Ray and 2 deputies behind me. The others spread out to search the surrounding area. The metal stairs groaned under our weight, the sound echoing through the silent forest. When we reached the top, the sheriff paused at the open door, signaling for us to wait before slowly pushing it wider and stepping inside. Elliot wasn't there. The cabin was exactly as we had left it, sleeping bags and backpacks still in place, but there was no sign of my friend. On the desk, prominently displayed as if intentionally left for us to find, was the logbook he had taken from the second tower. It was open to an entry I hadn't seen before, dated October 1973 and written in a cramped, urgent hand. "It's using the towers. Moving between them somehow. Not through the forest, through them. The structures themselves are connected. God help me. I think they were built that way on purpose. Sheriff Dawson read the entry over my shoulder, her brow furrowing. This doesn't make sense, she muttered. The towers were built by the Forestry Service in the 1920s. Standard design. But Ray, who had been examining the symbols Naomi had found carved into the wall, shook his head slowly. No, Sheriff. These weren't built by any government agency. His weathered finger traced one of the symbols, a vertical line intersected by 3 horizontal ones. These are old signs. Boundary markers. Warnings. He moved to the window, pointing out toward the forest. The native tribes that lived here before the settlers came. They knew about the thin places. Places where the boundary between worlds isn't as solid as it should be. One of the deputies snorted skeptically, but Sheriff Dawson silenced him with a look. Ray's family has been in these parts longer than anyone, she said quietly. If he says there's something to these stories, I'm inclined to listen. She turned back to me. Mr. Mercer, was there anything unusual about your friend's behavior before you left him? Anything that might suggest where he went? I thought about Elliot's fascination with the towers, his eagerness to explore the second structure despite the obvious dangers. He became obsessed with the towers, I admitted, especially after we found the second one. It was like he couldn't stop thinking about them, talking about them. A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Do you think he went to the other tower? Looking for Naomi and Vera. The search of the surrounding area yielded nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no indication of where 3 people could have vanished to in an isolated forest. By mid-afternoon, Sheriff Dawson made the decision to extend the search to the second tower. With Ray leading the way, we hiked through the increasingly dense forest, the daylight filtering weakly through the canopy above. The silence that had seemed so unnatural the day before was now broken by the calls of the search party, voices echoing among the trees. Elliot, Naomi, Vera. The second tower appeared suddenly before us, just as it had the previous day. But something had changed. The rusted metal now seemed darker, slick with a substance that glistened in the fading light. The cabin at the top was intact, but all the windows were now broken, jagged shards of glass protruding from the frames like teeth. Sheriff Dawson ordered everyone to stay back while she and one deputy approached the base of the tower, their weapons drawn. I couldn't hear what they said to each other as they examined the structure, but I saw the moment of decision as the sheriff holstered her weapon and placed her foot on the first step. The deputy followed, and together they began the climb up the twisted staircase. The rest of us watched in tense silence as they ascended, their figures growing smaller against the darkening sky. They had almost reached the top when it happened. A sound like tearing metal echoed through the forest, so loud that several of us instinctively covered our ears. The entire tower shuddered, the staircase twisting in a way that defied physics, stretching and contracting like something alive. Sheriff Dawson and her deputy clung to the railing as the structure beneath them writhed. There was a moment when it seemed they might make it back down, the sheriff reaching out toward the deputy below her. Then the staircase simply collapsed, folding in on itself like paper. The deputy fell first, a brief cry cut short by impact. Sheriff Dawson managed to hold on longer, her body dangling from what remained of the upper railing as the tower continued to twist and reshape itself. We watched in horror, frozen in place, as the metal wrapped around her like fingers closing into a fist. Her scream lingered in the air long after she disappeared into the impossible geometry of the collapsing structure. What happened next is difficult to describe. The tower didn't fall. It folded, sections of metal and wood turning in on themselves, compressing into smaller and smaller spaces until the entire 60-foot structure had collapsed into something barely larger than a doorway. And through that doorway, I caught a glimpse of somewhere else. Not another part of the forest, but a vast darkness threaded with points of light that were not stars. In that darkness, I saw faces. Elliot's, his eyes wide with a terror beyond anything human. Naomi's, her mouth open in a silent scream. Vera's, tears streaming down cheeks that were stretched too thin, as if she was being pulled apart. And others, dozens of others, some fresh with fear, others so ancient they had forgotten what it was to be afraid. All of them trapped in that impossible space between dimensions, where the towers served not as lookouts, but as doorways. Ray grabbed my arm. yanking me backward as the remaining deputies opened fire on the grotesque doorway. The bullets disappeared into the darkness without effect. "Run!" Ray shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "It's opening fully." I didn't understand what he meant until I saw movement in the darkness, something vast and patient unfolding itself, preparing to step through into our world. I ran. We all ran. Through the forest that was no longer silent, but filled with sounds no human throat could make. Behind us, the darkness spilled out from what had been the tower, flowing between the trees like liquid shadow. I heard the screams of the deputies as it caught them, one by one. Only Ray and I made it to the vehicles, and only my SUV would start. The other engines dead, their batteries drained just as mine had been the night before. As we sped down the forest road, the rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness where the second tower had stood, darkness that was spreading, consuming the forest tree by tree. Ray sat beside me, his face ashen, whispering something that might have been a prayer. "The other tower," I gasped, remembering our original campsite. "We have to warn anyone who might be there." Ray's hand closed around my wrist with surprising strength. "No," he said, his voice suddenly clear and firm. "That's what it wants. To draw us back. The towers are all connected, always have been. Doorways. And now they're all open." I ignored his warning. I couldn't leave without knowing for certain what had happened to my friends, to Sheriff Dawson and her deputies. At the fork in the road, I turned toward our original tower despite Ray's protests. The darkness hadn't reached this far yet, but the forest was changing as we drove, the trees twisting into unnatural shapes, the undergrowth writhing as if trying to free itself from the earth. The clearing appeared ahead, and with it, our tower, still standing, still seemingly intact. But as we drew closer, I could see that the cabin at the top was glowing with a pale, sickly light. The windows reflected not the forest around them, but that same vast darkness I had glimpsed through the collapsing second tower. And descending the staircase, moving with a fluid grace that no human could match, were three figures I recognized all too well. They looked like Elliot, Naomi, and Vera, their faces, their bodies, their clothes all exactly as I remembered. But they moved wrong, as if their joints bent in extra places. And their eyes, when they turned toward our approaching vehicle, reflected the light like animals caught in headlights. No, not like animals. Like whatever existed in that space between the towers, wearing my friends like ill-fitting clothes. Ray was screaming at me to turn around, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away from those familiar faces and unfamiliar eyes. It wasn't until the things that had been my friends began to run toward us, covering ground with impossible speed, that survival instinct finally broke through my paralysis. I slammed the SUV into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt as I executed a frantic three-point turn. The last thing I saw as we sped away was Elliot's face, or the thing wearing it, split into a grin that extended literally from ear to ear, revealing rows of teeth that no human mouth could contain. That was 3 months ago. Ray died of a heart attack 2 weeks after our escape, but not before sharing everything he knew about the towers with federal authorities. The official story is that a forest fire destroyed over 2,000 acres of the Talladega National Forest. Satellite images show nothing but charred earth where the towers once stood. The bodies of Sheriff Dawson, her deputies, and my friends were never recovered. I haven't returned to Nashville. I don't sleep much anymore, and when I do, I dream of towers that reach not up toward the sky, but down into places where nothing should live. Sometimes I wake thinking I've heard Naomi's voice calling my name from just outside my window, or caught a glimpse of Elliot watching me from across the street. The authorities have placed me in protective custody, though they won't say exactly what they're protecting me from. But I know that whatever came through those towers is still out there, wearing familiar faces, waiting for me to let my guard down. And I know that somewhere, in the darkness between dimensions, the real Elliot, Naomi, and Vera are still conscious, still aware, still experiencing horrors that no human was ever meant to endure. Their suffering is my burden now, a weight I'll carry until the day something with my friend's face and too many teeth finally finds me. My name's Elias Whitaker, I'm 29 years old, and I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'd been itching for a break from the city grind, So when my old college buddy, Nora Calloway, suggested camping in Alabama's Talladega National Forest, I was all in. Nora's a tough-as-nails paramedic from Birmingham, always chasing thrills. She'd heard about these abandoned fire lookout towers deep in the forest, rusted relics from the 30s, perfect for a creepy adventure. Our friend Theo Vance, a wiry photographer from Mobile with a knack for finding weird history, tagged along too. He'd been hyping up the tower's eerie vibes for weeks. We packed my beat-up Jeep Cherokee with gear, tents, lanterns, a cooler of beer, and hit the road. The plan was simple: camp at the base of one tower, maybe climb it for a view. I figured it'd be a fun, spooky weekend. Man, was I wrong. The drive to Talladega was smooth, just us laughing over Nora's terrible road trip playlist. Think bad 90s pop. The forest swallowed us up as we turned onto a dirt road, tires crunching over pine needles. We found the first tower after an hour of winding trails, its skeletal frame looming against the dusk. It was taller than I'd imagined, maybe 80 feet, rust eating at its steel legs. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Theo was already snapping photos, muttering about the vibe being perfect for his portfolio. Nora just grinned, daring me to climb the rickety stairs first. I laughed it off, but something about the tower's shadow made my skin crawl. We set up camp nearby, a small clearing with a fire pit. The forest was quiet, too quiet, honestly. No birds, no rustling, just us and that damn tower. As night fell, we cracked open some beers and swapped stories around the fire. Nora told us about a local legend she'd heard at work, something about the towers being built on old burial grounds, disturbed when the Forest Service carved out trails. I rolled my eyes. She's always been a sucker for ghost stories. Theo, though, ate it up, saying he'd read about missing hikers in the area back in the 70s. I didn't think much of it, just campfire talk to amp up the spooky mood. We decided to sleep in shifts, keeping an eye on the fire. I took the first watch, staring into the flames while the tower stood like a silent giant in the dark. Every so often, I'd glance up, half expecting to see something in the windows of the lookout cabin. Nothing, just my imagination, right? The fire was dying down when I heard it. A low hum, like a generator, but softer, pulsing from somewhere deep in the forest. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't mechanical, it felt alive. I shook Nora awake, whispering about the noise. She sat up, bleary-eyed, and listened for a minute before shrugging it off as wind or maybe a distant car. But there were no roads for miles. Theo stirred, mumbling something about drones, then passed out again. I tried to laugh it off, but my gut was screaming that something was off. I kept my flashlight trained on the tower, its silhouette barely visible now. The hum faded, but the air felt thicker, like it was pressing down on us. I told myself it was just the woods playing tricks. I wish I'd trusted my instincts. We didn't climb the tower that night. Nora said it was too dark, and Theo was already half asleep in his tent. I stayed up longer, poking at the fire, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. The forest seemed to close in, branches creaking in a breeze I couldn't feel. I kept thinking about what Nora said: burial grounds, disturbed spirits. Stupid, I know, but it stuck with me. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, the hum was gone, but I couldn't shake the sense we weren't alone. I kept my knife close, just in case. Theo's snoring and Nora's soft breathing were the only sounds now, but I barely slept. Every twig snap made me jolt awake, eyes darting to the tower's outline against the stars. It felt like it was watching us. Morning came, gray and foggy, the kind of dawn that makes everything look wrong. We made coffee over the fire, but the mood was off. Theo was quiet, scrolling through his camera roll, muttering about weird smudges in his photos from last night. Nora was her usual cocky self, but I caught her glancing at the tower too many times. We decided to explore the area, maybe check out another tower nearby. The forest felt different in daylight, less oppressive, but still too still. No squirrels, no birdsong, just our footsteps crunching on pine cones. I tried to joke about it, saying we'd scared off the wildlife, but it fell flat. We found an old trail marker, half buried in moss, pointing to another tower a mile away. Nora was all for it, but my stomach twisted. Something was pulling us deeper. The second tower was worse than the first, more rusted, leaning slightly, like it might collapse if you sneezed. The ladder was missing rungs, and the cabin at the top looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Theo was obsessed, climbing halfway up before Nora yelled at him to come down. He ignored her, snapping photos of the view. I stayed on the ground, scanning the trees. That hum was back, faint but unmistakable, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I didn't say anything this time. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But I noticed Nora's hand on her pocket knife, her eyes darting around like mine. We weren't just camping anymore. Something about these towers was wrong, and we were too stubborn to admit it. Yet, we set up a new camp near the second tower, mostly because Theo insisted on getting more shots at sunset. I didn't like it, but I didn't want to be the one to chicken out. We built a fire, ate some chili, and tried to act normal. Nora started teasing Theo about his artistic vision, but her laugh was forced. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the trees, just quick flashes, like something darting out of sight. Probably deer, I told myself, but my hands were sweaty despite the cool air. The hum was louder now, steady, like a heartbeat in the earth. Theo heard it too. He stopped mid-sentence, his face pale. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it. Something was out there, and it wasn't just the forest. By nightfall, the tension was thick. We sat close to the fire, our backs to the tower, like it was the only thing keeping us safe. Theo kept his camera in his lap, like it was a weapon. Nora sharpened her knife, the scrape of the whetstone cutting through the silence. I tried to focus on the fire, but my eyes kept drifting to the tower's silhouette. It looked different, taller maybe, or was it just the dark playing tricks? The hum was constant now, vibrating in my chest. I wanted to pack up and leave, but the jeep was a mile back at the first camp. We'd have to wait till morning. I told myself we'd be fine, just one night. But deep down, I knew something horror-filled was coming, and we were right in its path. The morning fog clung to the trees like a bad dream, and I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. My neck was stiff, and the hum from last night still echoed in my head, faint but nagging. Nora was already up, boiling water for coffee, her face tight, like she hadn't slept either. Theo was fiddling with his camera, muttering about dead batteries despite charging them yesterday. That was our first problem. His camera was his lifeline, and now it was acting up. I tried to lighten the mood, joking that the forest was jealous of his shots, but nobody laughed. We were all on edge, the air thick with that disturbing quiet. The second tower loomed over us, its rusted frame creaking in the wind. I wanted to pack up and head back to the jeep, but Nora insisted we explore more. We came for adventure, she said. I didn't argue, but I should have. We decided to hike to a third tower Theo found on an old map he'd downloaded. It was deeper in Talladega, maybe 2 miles out, through denser woods. The trail was overgrown, roots tripping us up every few steps. I kept my eyes on the ground, but that hum was back, louder now, like it was following us. Theo noticed it too, stopping to record it on his phone since his camera was useless. He played it back, and the sound was wrong. It wasn't just a hum. There were whispers in it, like voices too faint to make out. Nora scoffed, saying it was just interference, but her hand stayed on her knife. I felt that horror creeping in, like when you realize you've walked into something you can't walk out of. We kept moving, but I was starting to hate this trip. The trail got rougher, forcing us to spread out. Nora took the lead, hacking at vines with a stick, while Theo lagged, messing with his phone. I stayed in the middle, my backpack heavier with every step. Then I saw it. A scrap of fabric caught on a thorn, faded but clearly part of a jacket. It looked recent, not like something left out here for decades. I called Nora over, and she frowned, saying it was probably a hiker's trash. But Theo's face went pale. He recognized the pattern. That's like the jacket from those missing hiker reports, he whispered. My stomach dropped. I wanted to turn back, but Nora pushed us forward, saying we were too deep to quit now. That was her mistake, thinking we could outrun whatever was out here. We reached the third tower by noon, and it was a wreck. Half the ladder was gone, and the cabin at the top was caved in, like something heavy had smashed it. The hum was deafening now, vibrating in my teeth. I caught Theo staring at the ground, where the dirt looked churned up, like something had been dragged. He didn't say anything, but his hands were shaking. I wanted to scream at Nora for dragging us here, but I didn't. Instead, I suggested we head back to the jeep, maybe camp there tonight. She hesitated, then nodded, but Theo was fixated on the tower. There's something up there, he said, pointing to the broken cabin. I didn't look. I didn't want to. The air felt wrong, like it was watching us, waiting for us to screw up. We started back, but the trail looked different. Landmarks I'd noted, a split tree, a pile of rocks, were gone. I swore we were on the right path, but it was like the forest had shifted. Nora pulled out her compass, but the needle spun wildly, no matter which way she turned. "Cheap piece of junk," she muttered, but her voice was shaky. Theo was no help, scrolling through his phone, obsessed with that recording. He played it again, and this time, I heard it. A voice, clear as day, whispering, "Stay." My blood ran cold. I grabbed his phone and shut it off, yelling at him to focus. That was my mistake, not listening closer, not realizing the forest was talking to us. The hum grew louder, and I felt eyes on my back. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that made every tree look like a threat. We were lost, no question. Nora admitted it, which was rare for her. She suggested climbing the second tower again to get a better view, maybe spot the jeep. I hated the idea. Those towers were bad news, but we were out of options. We backtracked to the second tower, the hum following us like a shadow. When we got there, the ladder looked worse than before, like it had rusted overnight. Theo volunteered to climb, saying he'd be quick. Nora and I stayed below, scanning the trees. That's when I saw it. A shape, just beyond the clearing, too tall to be human. It was gone in a blink, but my heart was pounding. This was getting scary fast. Theo shouted from halfway up the tower, saying he saw something moving in the distance. Not an animal, something else. He sounded freaked, which wasn't like him. Nora yelled at him to come down, but he kept climbing, desperate for a better look. I wanted to bolt, but we couldn't leave him. The hum was a roar now, like a swarm of bees in my skull. I noticed scratches on the tower's base, deep and fresh, like claw marks. Not bear, not cougar, something worse. I pointed them out to Nora, and her face went white. She didn't say it, but I knew she was thinking what I was. We'd stumbled into something horror-filled, something that didn't want us here. And we just sent Theo closer to it. We waited for Theo, but he was taking too long. The forest was darker now, the air thick with that disturbing hum. I tried calling up to him, but my voice felt swallowed by the trees. Nora paced, her knife out, eyes darting to every shadow. I kept thinking about that jacket scrap, those missing hikers. Were they lost like us? Did they hear the hum too? My mind raced to horror movies I'd seen, like the Blair Witch Project, where people vanish in the woods, leaving only scraps behind. This felt like that, but worse, real. I checked my phone for a signal, but it was dead, just like Theo's camera. The forest was cutting us off, and I couldn't shake the feeling we'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Nora grabbed my arm, pointing to the ground. There were prints, not ours, not animal. They were long, narrow, with too many toes. My mouth went dry. "We need to get Theo and go," she whispered, her voice barely steady. I nodded, but my legs felt like lead. The hum was everywhere now, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I looked up at the tower, where Theo was a tiny figure near the top. He wasn't moving. Was he frozen? Or was something up there with him? The forest felt alive, closing in, and I knew we were running out of time. Whatever was out here, it was close, and it was no ghost story. It was real, and it was coming for us. Theo wasn't moving up there, just a dark shape against the fading sky, and my heart was hammering. I yelled his name, my voice cracking, but he didn't answer. The hum was a full-on assault now, vibrating in my bones, like the forest itself was screaming. Nora grabbed my sleeve, her face pale, and pointed to the tower's base. Those claw marks we'd seen earlier? They were deeper now, like something had been scraping at the metal while we stood there. This wasn't just scary anymore. It was horror unfolding right in front of us. I shouted for Theo again, but the hum drowned me out. Then, I saw it. A shadow, too long, too thin, slipping between the trees. Not human, not animal. My stomach twisted, and I knew something was clearly wrong. We weren't alone. Nora's grip tightened, her knife shaking in her hand. "We gotta get him down," she hissed, but her eyes were locked on the trees. I nodded, though every instinct screamed to run. I started toward the ladder, my legs wobbly, when Theo finally moved. He leaned over the edge, his face white as a sheet, and screamed, "It's up here!" My blood froze. What the hell was up there? Before I could shout back, the tower groaned, a deep, metallic wail, like it was bending under some weight. Nora cursed, shoving me toward the ladder. "Go, Elias," she yelled. I didn't want to climb, but Theo was my friend. I grabbed the rungs, the metal cold and slick under my hands, and started up, praying I wouldn't die. The ladder shook as I climbed, each step feeling like a mistake. The hum was louder up here, pulsing in my skull, and I swear I heard those whispers again. Stay, stay, stay. My hands were sweating, slipping on the rungs. Halfway up, I glanced down. Nora was pacing, scanning the trees, her knife catching the last of the sunlight. Then I saw it again, that shadow, closer now, circling our camp. It moved too fast, too smooth, like it wasn't touching the ground. My mind flashed to those old horror stories about skinwalkers, things that mimic but aren't human. I pushed the thought away and kept climbing, my breath ragged. Theo needed me, and I wasn't leaving him to whatever was up there. I reached the platform, my legs burning, and found Theo curled up against the cabin wall, his camera clutched like a lifeline. "It's in there," he whispered, pointing to the broken cabin door. The air up here was thick, almost suffocating, and the hum felt like it was coming from inside the cabin. I peeked through the shattered window, my flashlight shaking. Something moved inside, tall, hunched, with limbs too long for its body. Its eyes glinted, not like a deer's, but sharp, aware. My heart stopped. This was no animal, no hiker. It was something else, something disturbing that didn't belong in this world. I grabbed Theo's arm, yanking him toward the ladder. "We're going now." Theo was shaking, muttering about how it had whispered his name. I didn't want to hear it. I just wanted off this tower. As we started down, the ladder screeched, bolts popping loose. Whatever was in the cabin was moving, scraping against the walls. I heard Nora scream below, not in fear, but in warning. I looked down and saw her swinging her knife at the air, like she was fighting something I couldn't see. The shadow from the trees was gone, but the claw marks on the tower were spreading, metal peeling like paper. This was horror straight out of a nightmare, and we were stuck in it. I pushed Theo faster, my hands slipping on the rungs. We had to get to Nora before it was too late. The hum turned into a growl, low and guttural, shaking the tower. Theo slipped, nearly falling, but I caught his wrist, my arms screaming from the strain. "Move!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. Down below, Nora was shouting my name, her voice sharp with panic. I saw flashes of movement around her, more shadows, darting between the trees, too many to count. They weren't just watching anymore, they were closing in. My mind raced to every scary movie I'd ever seen, like The Descent, where things hunt you in the dark. But this wasn't a movie. This was real, and we were in deep. I didn't know what those things were, but they were everywhere, and they wanted us. We hit the ground, and I grabbed Theo, dragging him toward Nora. She was backed against the tower, knife out, eyes wild. "They're all around us," she yelled. The shadows were bolder now, stepping into the clearing, their forms flickering like bad reception. Tall, thin, with arms that bent wrong. Their faces, if you could call them that, were blank, just those glinting eyes. The hum was deafening, like a chant now, urging us to stay. I looked at the Jeep keys in my pocket, a mile away at the first camp. We'd never make it. Nora grabbed my arm, pointing to the trail we'd come from. "Run or fight?" she asked. I didn't know. All I knew was this was wrong, and we were running out of time. The air was heavy, like it was pushing us down. Theo was hyperventilating, clutching his camera like it could save him. I scanned the clearing, trying to count the shadows, but they kept moving, blending into the trees. One step closer, its head tilting like it was studying us. My skin crawled. It didn't move like anything natural. It glided, like it was part of the forest itself. Nora whispered, "What the hell are they?" I had no answer. All I could think was that we disturbed something. Maybe those burial grounds Nora mentioned. The towers, the hum, the shadows, it was all connected, and we were caught in the middle of something horror-filled, something that didn't want us leaving. Nora made the call. "We run," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. I nodded, grabbing Theo's shoulder. The shadows didn't charge, but they were closing the circle, their eyes glinting brighter. The hum felt like it was inside me now, pulling at my thoughts, making my head fuzzy. I shook it off, focusing on Nora's voice. "Back to the Jeep," she said, pointing to the trail. But the trail looked different again, twisted, like the forest was rearranging itself. We had no choice. We bolted, the shadows shifting behind us, their movements silent but fast. The terror was real now, and I knew we were in a fight for our lives. with no idea what we were running from. Branches snapped under my feet as we sprinted through the forest, the hum chasing us like a living thing. Nora led the way, her knife slashing at vines, while Theo stumbled behind me, his camera banging against his chest. The shadows were everywhere, gliding between trees, their glinting eyes like headlights in the dusk. My lungs burned, but stopping wasn't an option. The Jeep was our only shot, a mile back at the first camp. The trail twisted, unrecognizable, like the forest was hurting us. I kept thinking of horror movies like Predator, where the hunter picks you off one by one. This felt like that, but worse. Those things weren't just hunting, they wanted us to suffer. My heart pounded as I yelled, "Keep moving!" The air was thick, the hum screaming in my skull. Nora tripped, her foot catching a root, and she hit the ground hard. I skidded to a stop, grabbing her arm to yank her up. Her knife flew from her hand, vanishing into the underbrush. "Leave it," I shouted, but her eyes were wide, locked on something behind me. I turned, and one of those things was there, too close, its long arms dangling, head tilted like it was curious. Its blank face made my stomach lurch, a horror so raw I froze. Theo screamed, snapping me out of it, and I pulled Nora to her feet. We ran again, the shadow gliding after us, silent but fast. The forest felt alive, branches clawing at my face like they were on its side. We had to make it to the Jeep, or we were dead. The hum was a roar now, shaking the ground, and I swear the trees were moving, closing in. Theo was slowing, gasping for air, his face gray. "I can't," he wheezed, but I grabbed his jacket, dragging him forward. "You don't stop," I yelled, my voice hoarse. Nora was ahead, dodging roots, but she kept looking back, her face pale. The shadows were multiplying, their shapes flickering in my peripheral vision. I remembered a story from my dad about getting lost in the woods as a kid, how panic makes you stupid. I was trying not to panic, but the horror was real. Those things weren't human, weren't natural. They were something else, and they were gaining. The Jeep was our only hope, but it felt a million miles away. We burst into a clearing, and there it was, the first camp, the Jeep glinting in the fading light. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, the hum so loud it drowned out my thoughts. Nora shouted, "Hurry," as she scanned the trees. The shadows were closer, their forms clearer now, tall, bony, with fingers like knives. Theo collapsed against the Jeep, sobbing, still clutching his damn camera. I jammed the key into the lock, but the door wouldn't budge. "What the hell?" I yelled, realizing the handle was bent, like something had crushed it. My heart sank. This was a life-and-death moment, and we were trapped. The shadows stepped into the clearing, their eyes glowing, and I knew we were out of time. Nora kicked at the Jeep's door, cursing, while I tried the passenger side. It opened, thank God, and I shoved Theo inside. "Get in," I screamed at Nora. She dove in, crawling over Theo to the driver's seat. The shadows were closing in, their movements jerky, like broken puppets. I climbed in, slamming the door as one of them lunged, its fingers scraping the window. The glass held, but the sound was pure horror, metal on glass, sharp and wrong. Nora turned the key, and the engine sputtered. "Come on," she yelled, slamming the dashboard. The shadows surrounded us, their faces blank but somehow hungry. My mind screamed, "This is it, we're done." Then the engine roared to life, and Nora floored it. The Jeep lurched forward, tires spinning on pine needles. The shadows didn't chase, they just watched, their eyes burning into us. The hum pulsed in my chest, like it was trying to pull me back. I glanced at Theo, who was muttering, "They know us, they know our names." His camera was still in his lap, the screen cracked but glowing faintly. I didn't want to look, but I did, and saw a photo he'd taken from the tower. It wasn't just the forest. There were faces in the trees, blank and eyeless, staring right at the camera. My skin crawled. We were escaping, but it didn't feel like winning. The forest was letting us go, or maybe it was just playing with us. Nora swerved down the dirt road, branches scraping the Jeep's sides. The hum was fading, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting those things to appear. Nothing yet, but the air still felt wrong, heavy with that disturbing weight. Theo was quiet now, his breathing shallow. I noticed blood on his arm, a scratch, deep and jagged, like something had grabbed him on the tower. "You okay?" I asked, but he just stared out the window. Nora's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes darting to the trees. We were moving, but the forest was endless, and I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't out of danger yet. The road got rougher, the Jeep bouncing over rocks. Nora swore under her breath, trying to keep control. I saw a sign for the highway up ahead, a flicker of hope, but then the engine coughed and the Jeep slowed. No, 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 Nora muttered, pumping the gas. It stalled completely, leaving us in silence except for that damn hum, creeping back. The shadows weren't visible, but I felt them, watching, waiting. I looked at Theo, who was clutching his camera tighter, his eyes wide. "They're not done," he whispered. My heart pounded. We'd escaped the clearing, but this was still a life-and-death fight, and something told me the forest wasn't letting us go that easily. We sat there, stranded, the Jeep dead in the middle of the dirt road. Nora tried the key again, but nothing. The hum was louder now, like a heartbeat in the air. I looked out the window and saw it. A shadow, taller than the rest, standing just off the road. Its head tilted, and I swear it was looking right at me. My breath caught, the horror sinking in. We weren't safe. Not even close. The highway was so near, but it might as well have been a world away. Nora grabbed my hand, her grip tight. "We walk," she said, her voice shaking but firm. I nodded, but as we opened the doors, the hum surged, and I knew whatever was out there was ready to make its move. We stepped out of the Jeep, the forest swallowing all sound except that relentless hum. Nora led the way, her flashlight cutting through the dark, but it barely helped. The highway was maybe a quarter-mile off, but every step felt like wading through mud. Theo was a mess, clutching his scratched arm, his camera dangling from its strap. I kept my eyes on the trees, waiting for those shadows to pounce. The air was thick, pressing down, and the hum was now a chorus of whispers, saying our names: Elias, Nora, Theo. My skin prickled, the horror of it sinking deep. I remembered a news story about hikers in Talladega vanishing without a trace, their gear found, but no bodies. That was us now, and I was terrified we'd end up the same way. Nora stopped, her flashlight flickering. "This isn't right," she whispered, pointing to the ground. The dirt road was gone, replaced by soft earth, like we'd veered off without noticing. My stomach dropped. The forest was doing it again, twisting, trapping us. I grabbed Theo, who was muttering about his photos, saying they'd caught something. I didn't want to know. "Focus, man," I snapped, but his eyes were glassy, like he was somewhere else. That was our first mistake, not noticing how far gone he was. The shadows were back, their shapes flickering at the edge of the light. They didn't rush us, just watched, their presence so disturbing it made my chest tight. We had to keep moving. We pushed forward, the highway's faint glow visible through the trees. Hope flickered, but it was short-lived. Theo stopped, dropping to his knees, fumbling with his camera. "I have to show you," he said, his voice desperate. Before I could stop him, he turned it on, the screen lighting up his face. The photo was worse than before, those blank faces in the trees, but now they were closer, their eyes glinting like the shadows around us. "They're in the pictures," he whispered. Nora yanked the camera away, smashing it on a rock. "Stop it," she yelled, but it was too late. The hum spiked, a deafening roar, and the shadows moved, closing in fast. Theo's obsession was our deadly mistake, and it was about to cost us everything. Nora grabbed Theo, dragging him toward the highway, but he was fighting her, screaming about needing his camera. I shoved him forward, my hands shaking. The shadows were everywhere now, their long arms reaching, brushing my jacket. One grazed my arm, and it burned like ice. I yelped, stumbling, but Nora caught me. "Don't look at them," she shouted. We were so close to the highway, the sound of distant cars like a lifeline. But the forest wasn't done. The ground shifted, roots rising like they were alive, tripping us. I fell, my knee slamming into a rock, pain shooting through me. The horror was unbearable. These things weren't just hunting us. They were playing with us, like cats with mice. Theo broke free, running back toward the trees. "My camera!" he screamed, like it was his only thought. I yelled for him to stop, but he was gone, swallowed by the dark. The shadows surged after him, their forms blending into one massive shape. Nora and I froze, torn between chasing him and saving ourselves. That was our second mistake, hesitating. A scream ripped through the air, Theo's voice, cut off sharp. The hum went silent, and my heart sank. He was gone, I grabbed Nora's hand, pulling her toward the highway. Tears stung my eyes, but we couldn't stop. The shadows were still there, their eyes glowing, waiting for us to screw up again. We stumbled onto the highway, asphalt under our feet like a miracle. Cars sped by, their headlights blinding. I flagged one down, a trucker who looked at us like we were ghosts. "Get in," he said, and we did, collapsing in the cab. Nora was sobbing, her tough act gone. I couldn't speak, my mind stuck on Theo's scream. The trucker asked what happened, but we just shook our heads. The horror of it was too much. Those shadows, the hum, the forest that moved. We'd escaped, but at what cost? Theo was gone, and it was our fault for not watching him closer, for not leaving sooner. The trucker drove us to a gas station, the forest fading behind us, but I felt its eyes on me still. At the gas station, Nora and I sat in silence, wrapped in blankets from the trucker. My knee throbbed, and Nora's hands were scratched raw. We tried to explain to the cops, but how do you describe something so disturbing? They searched the forest, found our Jeep, doors ripped off, claw marks everywhere, but no sign of Theo or his camera. The official report called it a bear attack, but we knew better. Those things weren't bears. They were something older, tied to the towers, the burial grounds maybe. We disturbed them, and they took Theo as payment. The tragedy hit hard. Our friend, gone because we thought we could handle a spooky camping trip. I'm back in Chattanooga now, but I don't sleep. The hum's gone, but I hear it in my dreams, feel those eyes watching. Nora calls sometimes, but we don't talk about it. We can't. I keep thinking about what we did wrong, ignoring the signs, letting Theo climb, not running sooner. It's like a horror movie you can't unsee, except it was real, and we lost. I'll never go back to Talladega, never look at another tower. But deep down, I know they're still out there, waiting for the next idiot to wander in. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see a shadow outside my window, too tall, too thin, just watching. The worst part? I found one of Theo's photos on my phone, one he'd sent me before the camera died. It's blurry, but there's a face in the trees, blank, eyeless, staring right at me. I deleted it, but it's burned in my head. We escaped, but we didn't win. The forest let us go, but it kept Theo, and it's still out there, hungry for more. I made it out, but the horror followed me home, and I'll never be free of it. Never. My name is Fiona Whitley. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. The trip to Alabama was supposed to be a reprieve, a chance to disconnect from my high-stress job as an emergency room nurse and reconnect with myself after my divorce was finalized. My therapist had suggested immersive solitude as a way to process everything that had happened in the past year. When I stumbled across an online listing for a renovated fire lookout tower deep in the Cheaha Wilderness area, it seemed like the universe was sending me a sign. The drive from the Birmingham airport into rural Alabama was like traveling backward in time. The landscape grew increasingly rugged and isolated with each passing mile, cell service flickering in and out before disappearing entirely as I entered Talladega National Forest. My rental car, a compact sedan that was struggling with the uneven dirt roads, bounced and shuddered its way through the dense woods as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. I almost missed the turnoff for the lookout tower, a barely visible path marked only by a weathered wooden sign with faded lettering. According to the rental listing, the tower had been partially restored by a local historian before being abandoned again when funding ran out. Now it was occasionally rented to adventurous travelers seeking unique accommodations. The photos online had shown rustic charm, a simple bed, a wood stove, panoramic windows. What they hadn't conveyed was the profound isolation of the place. The tower materialized through the trees like something from a fairy tale, a skeletal structure of gray metal rising above the forest canopy, crowned with a square cabin that caught the last rays of sunlight. I parked near the base and sat for a moment, suddenly questioning my decision to spend a week alone in such a remote location. The forest around me had grown unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a heavy silence that seemed to press against the windows of my car. Gathering my courage and my supplies, I approached the tower and began the long climb up the metal staircase that zigzagged up its exterior. Each step creaked under my weight, the entire structure swaying slightly in the gentle breeze. By the time I reached the top, my arms were aching from carrying my bags, and sweat had soaked through my shirt despite the cool evening air. The cabin door was secured with a simple padlock, just as the owner had described. I fumbled with the key, acutely aware of how far I was from any other human being. The interior of the cabin was sparse but clean, a single room about 15 feet square, with large windows on all sides offering a breathtaking 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. A narrow bed was pushed against one wall, its mattress thin but covered with fresh linens. A small wood stove occupied one corner, already stacked with kindling and logs. A folding table and chair, a battery-powered lantern, and a few shelves holding basic supplies completed the furnishings. It was exactly what I had been looking for, a place where nothing would distract me from my thoughts. As I unpacked my food and clothing, I noticed a leather-bound book sitting on one of the shelves. Opening it revealed a guest book, with entries dating back several years. Most were brief, couples or solo travelers commenting on the beauty of the surroundings or the peaceful atmosphere. I flipped through the pages idly until an entry from 6 months prior caught my eye. The darkness between the trees is watching. It knows I'm alone. Don't trust the radio. The handwriting was jagged and pressed deeply into the page, as if written in haste or distress. I closed the book with an uneasy laugh, telling myself it was just someone with a flair for the dramatic or a horror writer working on inspiration. Still, I found myself glancing out the windows more frequently as I prepared a simple dinner on the wood stove. The forest had disappeared into absolute darkness, the windows now reflecting only the interior of the cabin and my own tense face. I realized I could no longer see where the trees ended and the sky began, just an impenetrable wall of black surrounding my fragile haven of light. Sleep didn't come easily that first night. The tower creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, metal expanding and contracting in the rapidly cooling air. The sounds of the forest gradually returned as night deepened, distant hoots of owls, the occasional rustling in the underbrush far below. But there was another sound that kept pulling me from the edge of sleep, a sound I couldn't identify, rhythmic and faint, like something being slowly dragged across metal. And beneath it all, barely perceptible, what sounded like a voice calling out words I couldn't quite make out. I woke to weak sunlight filtering through the dirty windows and the disorienting realization that I wasn't in my Portland apartment. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the silence. The disturbing sounds from the night before were gone, replaced by the gentle chorus of morning birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. I sat up and stretched, my body aching from the thin mattress, but my mind feeling clearer than it had in months. Maybe my therapist had been right about this trip after all. After a breakfast of instant coffee and granola bars, I decided to explore the area around the tower. The listing had mentioned hiking trails nearby, and I was eager to shake off the lingering unease from my first night. The descent down the metal stairs felt more precarious in the daylight, each step revealing just how high I'd been sleeping. At the bottom, I discovered something I hadn't noticed in the fading light of my arrival. A small shed nestled among the trees a short distance from the tower's base. The shed door hung partially open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, I found old forestry equipment, axes, shovels, coils of rope, covered in a thick layer of dust. Against the back wall stood a vintage radio set, its dials and meters reminiscent of World War II equipment. A handwritten note taped to its side read, "Emergency use only. Channel 16. I remembered the strange warning in the guest book and felt a chill despite the warming day. Why would an isolated lookout tower need an emergency radio if it was just a quirky vacation rental? The hiking trail began just beyond the shed, a narrow path that wound through the dense forest. As I followed it, the canopy of leaves above grew thicker, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. I had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when I spotted another metal structure through the trees, the silhouette of a second lookout tower rising above the forest. The rental listing hadn't mentioned another tower nearby, and I felt a spark of excitement at the discovery. Perhaps this one would offer a different perspective of the wilderness. As I approached, however, I realized this tower was in much worse condition than mine. Its metal framework was heavily rusted, with entire sections of the staircase missing. The cabin at the top appeared to have suffered severe damage. Windows broken, part of the roof collapsed inward. It clearly hadn't been maintained or restored like the tower I was staying in. Yet something about it drew me closer, a morbid curiosity to see the deteriorated twin of my temporary home. At the base of the damaged tower, I noticed strange markings carved into the metal supports. Symbols that resembled no alphabet I recognized, but nonetheless gave the unsettling impression of language. Some were simple geometric shapes, while others were more complex, with curved lines intersecting in patterns that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. They reminded me of the symbols sometimes used in nursing to indicate patient status or treatment protocols, but twisted into something unrecognizable and wrong. The sound of breaking glass made me jump, my head snapping up toward the cabin at the tower's peak. A shadow moved behind one of the few intact windows, just for an instant, but unmistakably human-shaped. My heart rate spiked as I called out, "Hello, is someone up there?" No answer came, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from above. The rational part of my brain suggested it was probably just another hiker exploring the abandoned structure, but something deeper, more instinctual, whispered that I should leave immediately. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the damaged tower. When I was a safe distance away, I turned and hurried back along the trail, the peaceful mood of my morning hike shattered. I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen was a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps an animal that had somehow made its way into the elevated cabin. But I couldn't shake the image of that distinctly human silhouette, observing me from behind dirty glass. By the time I reached my own tower, the sun was high overhead, and a new problem presented itself. The door at the top of the stairs was closed, though I distinctly remembered leaving it open when I descended that morning. Slowly, I climbed the swaying staircase, straining to hear any sounds from the cabin above. At the top, I hesitated before trying the handle. The door swung open easily, revealing the interior exactly as I'd left it, except for the guest book, which now lay open on my bed, turned to a blank page as if inviting a new entry. My pulse pounded in my ears as I carefully approached the book. I had definitely left it on the shelf. No one else had a key to the cabin according to the owner, and even if someone had climbed up while I was hiking, how had they gotten past the locked door? With trembling fingers, I picked up the book and flipped back to the disturbing entry I had read the previous night. The words were still there, but now additional text had been scratched beneath them in the same jagged handwriting. "I see you found the other one. It's how they travel. Come back after dark." Night fell with excruciating slowness. After finding the new message, I had briefly considered packing up and driving back to civilization, rental agreement be damned. But something kept me there, a combination of stubbornness, curiosity, and the practical reality that navigating those forest roads in darkness would be dangerous. Instead, I secured the door as best I could, propping the chair under the handle and keeping the large hunting knife I'd found in the shed close at hand. As twilight deepened into true darkness, the forest around my tower transformed once again. The familiar sounds of day creatures fell silent, replaced by the eerie symphony of the night. Hoots and howls that seemed somehow closer than they should be, more intent in their purpose. I sat beside the window, the lantern turned low, watching the shadows between the trees. According to the message, someone, or something, would be coming from the damaged tower after dark. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was allowing an obvious prank to frighten me. But I kept watching. The moon rose, nearly full, casting a silver glow over the forest canopy that from my elevated position looked like a rippling dark sea. In that pale light, I noticed movement on the trail I had taken earlier, a figure moving with unnatural smoothness between the trees, following the path toward my tower. My fingers tightened around the knife handle as I watched the figure emerge from the forest into the small clearing at the base of my tower. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in what appeared to be an old-fashioned forest ranger uniform. He stood perfectly still for a moment, head tilted upward as if sensing my presence above. Then, with swift, deliberate movements, he began to climb the metal staircase. Each step should have produced the same creaking I had experienced, but his ascent was eerily silent. I backed away from the window, heart hammering against my ribs, and positioned myself against the wall beside the door, knife raised. The chair I had wedged under the handle began to tremble slightly, though no sound came from outside. A voice drifted through the door, soft and strangely accented. "I know you're afraid, but I'm not here to harm you. I need to warn you." The handle turned, testing against the barricade I had created. "Please, there isn't much time before they notice I've left the other tower. They can't cross directly. They need humans for that, but they'll find another way." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "What do you want?" "My name is Marcus Thorne. I was stationed at the Western Tower in 1973. I've been trapped here since then." He paused, and I heard what sounded like labored breathing. "The towers aren't what you think they are. They were built as containment structures, not for spotting fires. The symbols, the specific distances between them, it's all part of a system designed to keep something imprisoned." The name struck me with a jolt of recognition. Marcus Thorne, I had seen that name somewhere before. Then it came to me, the guest book. Not in an entry, but on the inside cover, where the lookout's history was briefly outlined. Marcus Thorne was listed as the last official forest ranger assigned to these towers before they were decommissioned. He had allegedly gone missing during his service, presumed lost in the wilderness. "That's impossible," I said, moving closer to the door. "Marcus Thorne disappeared over 50 years ago. Whoever you are, this isn't funny. Time works differently, where I've been." The voice replied, a note of desperation creeping in. "Look, I don't expect you to believe everything, but at least let me show you something. Something that will prove what I'm saying." The door handle jiggled again. "Please, your life depends on it. All our lives do." Against every instinct screaming at me to keep the barrier in place, I slowly removed the chair from under the handle. As the door swung open, I raised the knife defensively, prepared to fight if necessary. The figure standing on the landing was indeed a man in a ranger's uniform, but his appearance was shocking. His skin was pallid and drawn tight over sharp cheekbones, his eyes sunken and haunted. He looked simultaneously young and ancient, as if time had both frozen and ravaged him. In his trembling hand, he held an old leather-bound notebook. "This is my logbook," he said, extending it toward me without stepping over the threshold. "Read the final entry. Then you'll understand why you need to leave this place immediately." When I hesitated to take it, he added, "I can't enter without an invitation. That's one of their rules, one of the few that still protects us." Keeping my distance, I accepted the notebook and flipped to the final pages. The entry was dated October 17th, 1973, and written in the same jagged hand as the messages in the guest book. "The entity has found a way to manipulate the tower's frequencies. It's not imprisoned by them anymore, it's using them. The design was flawed from the beginning. What the Civilian Conservation Corps thought they were building in the 1930s and what they actually created are two very different things. The towers don't just connect to each other, they connect to somewhere else, somewhere outside. And now it's found a doorway in." The next paragraph made my blood run cold. "It needs human hosts to fully cross over. Takes them from one tower, changes them in the other. Like a chrysalis. By the time you see the physical changes, it's already too late. They're hollowed out, filled with something else. I've barricaded myself in the eastern tower, but Richard from the western station found me yesterday. His skin was wrong. Stretching. He asked me to let him in. I refused. This morning I saw 3 more figures at the tree line. One was Richard again. The others I didn't recognize, but they're watching, waiting. I think they're building up their numbers before moving beyond the forest." I looked up from the logbook to find Marcus watching me intently, his eyes reflecting the lantern light like a nocturnal animal's. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly. "History is repeating itself. They've been dormant for decades, gathering strength. Now they're active again, and they found you, just like they found me." Before I could respond, a sharp, discordant sound cut through the night, like metal being twisted beyond its structural integrity. Marcus's head snapped around to look out into the darkness, his face contorting with fear. "They've noticed I'm gone," he whispered. "We need to disable the connection between the towers. It's the only way to stop them from spreading beyond the forest." The tower shuddered beneath us, the entire structure swaying as if caught in a strong wind, though the night air was perfectly still. Through the windows, I could see lights appearing in the forest, not flashlights or lanterns, but soft, pulsing orbs that moved with purpose between the trees. They were converging on our location from all directions, floating at various heights above the ground. And behind them, Moving more slowly but with inexorable determination came figures, human in basic shape but wrong in their proportions and movements. How? I asked, terror making my voice sharp. How do we stop this? Marcus pointed to the shed I had explored earlier. The radio. It's not actually a communication device. It's a frequency generator. It maintains the specific resonance that stabilizes the tower's connection. If we can disrupt it long enough, we might be able to sever their link to the other side. But we have to hurry. Once they surround us, we'll never make it to the ground. The descent from the tower was a nightmare of precarious footing and growing panic. The metal stairs seemed to vibrate beneath our feet, making each step treacherous. Marcus led the way, moving with a speed and certainty that belied his emaciated appearance. I followed close behind, trying not to look at the approaching lights or the distorted figures moving among the trees. The tower continued to shudder and sway, metal groaning under stresses that had nothing to do with wind or weight. We were about halfway down when the first of the entities reached the base of the tower. In the moonlight, I could see that it had once been human. The remnants of hiking clothes still clung to its frame, but its proportions were grotesquely distorted. Its limbs had elongated, joints bending at impossible angles, and its neck extended too far above hunched shoulders. As it looked up at us, I saw that its face had stretched sideways, the mouth and eyes curved around the skull in a mockery of a smile. "Don't look at them," Marcus warned, his voice tight with urgency. "They recognize attention. It draws them to you." He increased his pace, practically jumping down the remaining steps. I tore my gaze away from the creature and focused on his back, counting my own steps to keep from panicking completely. 20 more, 15, 10. As we neared the bottom, more figures emerged from the trees, forming a loose circle around the tower's base. They moved with an unsettling coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. Marcus hesitated on the final landing, surveying the situation. "We need a distraction," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then, reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small metal object, a lighter, tarnished with age but apparently still functional. "When I say run, head straight for the shed," he instructed, flicking the lighter to produce a small flame. From another pocket, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a page torn from his logbook, and set it alight. The flame caught quickly, bright in the darkness. These things, whatever they've become, they're still at least partly organic. They fear fire, one of the few vulnerabilities they've retained. With a swift motion, he tossed the burning paper into a patch of dry undergrowth near the tower's base. The flames spread rapidly, creating a barrier of fire between us and several of the approaching entities. They recoiled from the heat and light, their movements becoming jerky and disorganized. "Run!" Marcus shouted, and we bolted from the stairs toward the shed, using the momentary confusion to break through their circle. The few seconds it took to reach the shed felt like an eternity. I could hear them behind us, not footsteps, but a sort of sliding, scraping sound as their distorted limbs propelled them in our pursuit. Marcus reached the door first, yanking it open and pulling me inside before slamming it shut. He immediately began pushing heavy equipment against it, an old desk, shelves, anything that could serve as a barricade. "It won't hold them for long," he panted, moving to the ancient radio set I had seen earlier. "But we only need a few minutes." His fingers worked with practiced familiarity over the dials and switches, powering up the machine. A low hum filled the small space, along with the static crackle of electricity. This system generates a specific frequency that stabilizes the connection between our reality and theirs. If we can reverse the polarity and amplify the signal enough, we might be able to create a feedback loop that collapses the entire network. Outside, the entities had recovered from their initial fear of the fire, which was already beginning to die down in the damp forest undergrowth. They circled the shed, their movements visible through the single dirty window, distorted shadows passing back and forth in the moonlight. Something heavy thudded against the door, causing our hastily constructed barricade to shift slightly. Marcus worked faster, his hands now shaking with tension. "Here," he said, pointing to a series of switches along the bottom of the control panel. "When I give the signal, flip all of these from left to right, in sequence from 1 to 6. Not before, not after, exactly when I say." He was now adjusting a large dial at the center of the panel, watching an oscilloscope display that showed a waveform pattern. Each adjustment caused the pattern to change subtly, peaks and valleys shifting position. I need to find the exact inverse of the stabilizing frequency. Another impact hit the door, stronger this time, splintering the wood around the hinges. One of the entities pressed its face against the window, features so distorted they barely registered as human anymore, eyes milky white and unblinking. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that no human mouth should contain. A high-pitched keening sound emanated from it, quickly joined by similar cries from the others surrounding the shed. "They're calling for reinforcements," Marcus said grimly, still focused on his work. "The ones from the other tower will be here soon." His fingers made one final adjustment to the dial, and the waveform on the oscilloscope inverted completely. "Now, hit the switches." I lunged for the control panel, flipping the switches in rapid succession as instructed. With each one, the hum from the radio grew louder, changing in pitch until it became a painful whine that set my teeth on edge. The lights in the shed began to flicker, and the air felt suddenly dense, charged with electricity. Outside, the keening of the entities rose to a frenzied pitch, their attacks on the door and walls growing more violent. "Cover your ears," Marcus shouted over the noise, reaching for a final switch, larger than the others and protected by a safety cover. He flipped it up and, without hesitation, pressed the button beneath. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A blinding flash of white light filled the shed, accompanied by a sound like reality itself being torn apart. A deep, resonant booming that I felt more than heard, vibrating through my bones and organs. The entity's cries transformed into shrieks of agony. Through the window, I could see them convulsing, their already distorted bodies twisting further as if caught in some invisible force. The shed shook violently around us, equipment falling from shelves, the walls threatening to collapse. Marcus grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a trapdoor in the floor that I hadn't noticed before, a storm cellar or root basement of some kind. "Down here," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "The towers are going to collapse when the connection fails." He yanked the trapdoor open and pushed me toward the dark opening. I hesitated for only a second before descending the steep steps into darkness, Marcus right behind me. He pulled the trapdoor shut just as the shed's roof began to cave in above us. In the pitch-black cellar, the noise of destruction continued overhead, with splintering, metal twisting, the agonized screams of the entities gradually fading into the distance. The ground itself seemed to be heaving beneath us, as if the very earth was rejecting the unnatural presence that had infected it. I felt Marcus's hand find mine in the darkness, his grip surprisingly strong given his frail appearance. "It's working," he whispered, an edge of hope in his voice that hadn't been there before. "The connection is collapsing. The towers will fall, and without them, the entities can't maintain their presence here. They'll be pulled back to their own dimension." A particularly violent tremor shook our shelter, showering us with dirt from the ceiling. At least, that's the theory. No one's ever tried this before. We huddled in that dark cellar for what felt like hours as the world seemed to tear itself apart above us. Gradually, the tremors subsided, the screams faded to nothing, and an eerie silence descended. Neither of us moved, both afraid of what we might find if we ventured out too soon. Finally, when the silence had held for what must have been at least 30 minutes, Marcus struck his lighter, the small flame illuminating his gaunt face. "I think it's over," he said quietly, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. "But we should wait until dawn to be sure. Some of them might have survived if they were far enough from the towers when the connection collapsed." He leaned back against the earthen wall, the flame casting strange shadows across his features. "Besides, I'm not entirely sure what we'll find up there. The forest itself might have been affected by the energy release." As the adrenaline of our escape began to fade, questions that had been suppressed by immediate danger now surfaced in my mind. I studied Marcus in the wavering light, this impossible man who claimed to have been trapped for 50 years but looked both older and younger than he should. "How did you survive all this time?" I asked. "In the damaged tower, with those things hunting you?" The lighter flame reflected in his eyes as he considered the question. "Time moves differently in the spaces between dimensions," he said eventually. "What felt like months to me might have been decades out here. I learned their rules, their limitations. They couldn't enter without invitation, couldn't cross certain boundaries without human assistance. I stayed just beyond their reach, watching, waiting for an opportunity. His gaze met mine directly. For someone like you, an outsider who could help end this. But why didn't you try to contact the authorities? Other rangers must have come to these woods over the years. A bitter smile crossed his face. Oh, I tried. The few who came close enough to see me either fled in terror or became their victims before I could explain. And those entities, they're clever. They learned to mimic, to lure rescuers and hikers into the towers. Each new victim made them stronger, expanded their influence. He closed the lighter, plunging us back into darkness. Better to conserve this, he murmured. We may need it later. In the absolute blackness of the cellar, another question formed, one I was almost afraid to ask. Marcus, how do I know you're not one of them? That this isn't some elaborate trap? The thought had occurred to me earlier, but had been pushed aside in the chaos of our escape. Now, trapped underground with a stranger who by all rights should have died decades ago, the fear resurfaced. His laugh was soft and sad in the darkness. You don't. Not for certain. That's the true horror of what they do, the doubt they create. But ask yourself this. If I were one of them, why go through this elaborate plan? Why not simply take you in the tower when you were alone and vulnerable? The logic was sound, but doubt still nagged at me. Rest if you can, he continued. Dawn will come eventually. Morning arrived with a faint illumination seeping through the cracks around the trapdoor. Not the warm golden light of sunrise, but a cold, gray haze that suggested overcast skies. Marcus was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting perfectly still against the wall where I had last seen him. In the dim light filtering from above, his face looked more gaunt than ever, his eyes fixed on the ceiling with an intensity that was unsettling. Something's wrong, he said before I could speak. The light's not right. It should be brighter by now. He stood with surprising agility for someone who had spent the night on a dirt floor, moving toward the steps that led up to the trapdoor. Stay behind me, he instructed, his voice tense. If anything happens, run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run toward the main road. Slowly, he pushed against the trapdoor. It resisted at first, then gave way with a shower of debris, broken wood and twisted metal that had fallen from the destroyed shed above. As the opening widened, the strange quality of the light became more apparent. It was dimmer than it should be for morning, and tinged with an unnatural bluish hue. Marcus climbed out first, then reached back to help me up. The scene that greeted us was one of complete devastation. The shed had been entirely destroyed, its remains scattered across the clearing. But it was the landscape beyond that froze the breath in my lungs. Where there had once been forest, there was now something else. The trees nearest to us remained mostly intact, but further out, they had been twisted and fused together into impossible architectures, organic matter reshaped into forms that defied nature's laws. Arches and spirals of wood rose from the ground. Bark and branches melded together as if molten and then refrozen. And where my lookout tower had stood, there was now a column of blue-white light extending from the ground up into the clouded sky, which swirled around it like water circling a drain. The damaged tower was similarly transformed, connected to the first by tendrils of the same ethereal light that wove through the distorted forest. The air itself seemed wrong, thicker, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. We didn't collapse the connection, Marcus whispered, horror evident in his voice. We widened it. The feedback loop, it must have amplified the frequency instead of canceling it. He took a stumbling step backward, his composure cracking for the first time since I had met him. This is beyond anything I've seen before. The boundary between dimensions is dissolving. As if to confirm his assessment, a figure emerged from the column of light where my tower had been. Not one of the distorted former humans we had fled from the night before, but something far worse. It had a basic humanoid shape, but its proportions were fundamentally wrong, as if designed by someone who had only heard humans described but never seen one. Its limbs were too numerous, folding in on themselves in ways that hurt to look at directly. And its face, if it could be called that, was a shifting arrangement of features that never settled into any recognizable pattern. We need to get out of here, Marcus said urgently, grabbing my arm. Now, while the effect is still localized. But as we turned to flee, we realized that localized was a relative term. The distortion of the forest extended in all directions, creating a labyrinth of twisted organic matter that bore little resemblance to the woods I had hiked through the day before. The path to the main road was no longer discernible, obscured by walls of fused trees and strange fungal growths that pulsed with internal light. Worse, the entity from the tower had noticed us. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its impossible anatomy, covering ground more quickly than anything with legs should be able to. Behind it, more shapes were emerging from the light, some vaguely humanoid, others so alien that my mind struggled to process their forms. Marcus pulled me toward what looked like a narrow passage between two warped tree trunks, the only visible path that led away from the approaching horrors. "Don't look at them directly," he warned as we ran. "Their forms aren't meant for human perception. It's how they break down your resistance, cognitive dissonance that weakens the mind's natural defenses." I kept my eyes fixed on the ground ahead of us, following Marcus's lead as we wove through the transformed landscape. The air grew steadily thicker as we ran, each breath more labored than the last, as if the oxygen itself was being consumed by the spreading distortion. We had been running for perhaps 10 minutes when we stumbled upon something both familiar and terrifying. My rental car, now partially embedded in a mass of twisted vegetation that had grown around and through it. The metal of the vehicle had been warped and stretched in places, fused with the organic matter surrounding it. But remarkably, the driver's side door remained mostly intact, and through the window, I could see the keys still in the ignition. "Can it still work?" I gasped, my lungs burning from the effort of running through the increasingly hostile atmosphere. Marcus approached the car cautiously, examining the extent of the transformation. "The engine compartment seems relatively untouched," he observed. "If the fuel line and electrical systems are still functional, maybe." He glanced back the way we had come, his expression grim. "We don't have many other options. They're getting closer." In the distance, I could hear them now. Not footsteps, but a sort of slithering, squelching sound that grew steadily louder, punctuated by vocalizations no human throat could produce. With renewed urgency, Marcus began tearing away the vegetable matter that had grown over the driver's door. I joined him, my hands soon bloody from the sharp, thorn-like protrusions that covered some of the growths. Together, we managed to clear enough space to open the door, though it protested with a screech of warped metal. Marcus gestured for me to get in. "You drive," he said. "I've never operated a modern vehicle." I slid into the driver's seat, wincing as my arm brushed against a tendril of something that had grown through the dashboard. The key turned in the ignition, and to my immense relief, the engine sputtered to life. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, and I immediately threw the car into reverse, hoping to back out of the vegetable entanglement that held us. The tires spun momentarily, finding little traction on the transformed forest floor, then caught. With a sound like tearing flesh, the car pulled free of the growth that had begun to consume it. Maneuvering was nearly impossible on what had once been a dirt road, but was now a nightmare landscape of organic sculptures and pulsing, membranous barriers. I drove by instinct more than sight, following what seemed like slightly less impossible paths through the chaos. The car shuddered and protested, undercarriage scraping against protrusions from the ground, windshield gradually accumulating a film of something that the wipers only smeared rather than cleared. "There!" Marcus suddenly exclaimed, pointing to our right. A break in the distortion field. I turned my head to see what he was indicating. A patch of seemingly normal forest, trees standing upright and unaltered amidst the surrounding madness. I cranked the wheel hard, the car fishtailing as it left what remained of the road and plunged between the trees. Branches whipped against the windows, but I kept my foot heavy on the accelerator, desperation overriding caution. We burst through the tree line onto what was miraculously an actual road, paved asphalt, 2 lanes, with faded yellow lines down the center. I swerved to avoid a fallen branch, the tires screeching in protest as I fought to maintain control of the vehicle. Behind us, through the rearview mirror, I caught glimpses of the transformed forest, that sickly blue light still visible between the trees, but growing fainter as we put distance between ourselves and the epicenter of the distortion. "Keep going," Marcus urged, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Don't slow down until we're at least 5 miles clear." His voice sounded different, weaker, more strained, and when I glanced at him, I saw why. His skin had taken on a translucent quality, the veins beneath clearly visible and pulsing with that same unnatural blue light we had fled. His hands, gripping the dashboard, seemed to be losing their solidity, fingers occasionally blurring at the edges like a photograph out of focus. "Marcus, what's happening to you?" I asked, struggling to keep my attention on the road. He looked down at his dissolving hands with an expression of sad resignation. "I told you I was trapped between dimensions for decades. The connection that kept me here, it's failing." A bitter laugh escaped him. Ironic, isn't it? After all this time trying to escape that place, I finally succeed only to discover I can't exist without it. A truck appeared ahead, traveling in the opposite direction, the first sign of normal human civilization we had seen. The driver gave us a curious glance as we sped past, oblivious to the horror we were fleeing or the impossible passenger beside me. "We need to warn someone," I said, searching for road signs that might indicate where we were or how far to the nearest town. "The authorities, the military, someone who can contain this before it spreads further." Marcus shook his head, his form growing increasingly transparent. "Who would believe you? A nurse from Portland babbling about interdimensional entities and twisted forests." His voice had taken on an echo quality, as if coming from very far away. Besides, conventional weapons would only accelerate the process. The energy released would feed the distortion, make it grow faster. "Then what do we do?" I demanded, fear and frustration making my voice crack. "Just run and let that thing consume more people, more land?" For a long moment, Marcus was silent, his fading gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. "There might be a way," he finally said. "The original containment system failed because it was incomplete. The people who built it didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. But I've had 50 years to study it from the inside." His form flickered like a bad television signal, briefly disappearing entirely before resolving again. "Pull over. I don't have much time left." I guided the car onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires as we came to a stop. Marcus's body was now little more than a ghost-like outline, the back of the passenger seat visible through his torso. From his pocket, or where his pocket would have been if he still had substance, he withdrew his logbook, which remained solid even as he faded. He placed it on the seat between us. "The last few pages," he whispered, his voice now barely audible. "I've been working on the calculations for years. A modified containment field that could actually work. The entities can't be destroyed, but they can be sealed away properly this time." His hands passed through the book as he tried to open it, the pages remaining stubbornly closed to his touch. "You'll need to find someone who understands quantum field theory, non-Euclidean geometry." I reached for the book, my very solid fingers easily flipping it open to the final pages. They were filled with complex mathematical equations and geometric diagrams that meant nothing to me, symbols and notations far beyond my medical training. "I don't understand any of this," I admitted. "How am I supposed to find someone who does?" Marcus's form continued to dissolve, his features becoming increasingly indistinct. "Alabama State University, Department of Theoretical Physics. Dr. Eleanor Chun. She's been researching similar phenomena, though she doesn't know it." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort now, his voice fading in and out like a radio losing signal. "Tell her. Thorn Protocol. The logbook will convince her." "Marcus, wait." I began, but it was too late. With a final flicker, his form disappeared completely, leaving behind nothing but an empty passenger seat and the battered logbook. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, the engine idling, as I tried to process everything that had happened. Part of me, the rational, logical nurse from Portland, wanted to believe this had all been an elaborate hallucination, a stress-induced break from reality. But the logbook in my hands and the faint blue glow still visible in the rearview mirror told a different story. My phone, miraculously still in my pocket, showed no signal, not surprising given our remote location. But the GPS function still worked, and I was able to determine that we were on a state highway about 20 miles from the nearest town. With shaking hands, I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road, heading towards civilization with Marcus's logbook on the seat beside me. The small town of Cedar Creek appeared after about 30 minutes of driving, a collection of storefronts, churches, and modest homes that had probably remained unchanged for decades. I stopped at a gas station, using their restroom to splash water on my face and assess the damage from our escape. My clothes were torn and stained with an assortment of substances I couldn't identify, my hands and arms covered in small cuts from the thorn-like growths we had pulled from the car. To anyone looking at me, I must have appeared like a victim of assault or a car accident. The attendant gave me a concerned look as I purchased a bottle of water and asked for directions to the nearest police station. "You okay, ma'am? You look like you've been through something rough." His drawling accent and genuine concern were so wonderfully normal, so human, that I nearly broke down in tears. "Car trouble," I managed to say, the understatement of the century. "Got stuck in the forest trying to turn around. Had to walk a bit before finding help." The lie came easily, the truth being far too bizarre to share with this kind stranger. The police station was a small brick building just off the town's main street. Inside, I was met with similar concern from the desk sergeant, who immediately offered me coffee and a chance to get cleaned up proper before making my statement. I declined as politely as I could, insisting that I needed to speak with someone in authority immediately. The urgency in my voice must have convinced him, as he soon ushered me into the office of Sheriff Morris, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told her a heavily edited version of what had happened, that I had been staying in the Lookout Tower rental when I discovered strange activity in the forest, possibly related to some kind of accident or explosion that had affected the landscape. I mentioned finding Marcus Thorne's logbook, but presented it as something I had discovered in the tower rather than received from a man who had been missing for 50 years. The sheriff listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. "Ms. Whitley," she said when I had finished, "I appreciate you coming in with your concerns, but what you're describing sounds more like something from a science fiction movie than anything we've had reports of in this county." She leaned forward, her tone softening slightly. "Are you sure you didn't maybe hit your head during your ordeal? Or perhaps take something that might have affected your perception?" I had anticipated this response. It was exactly why Marcus had warned me about going to the authorities. "Sheriff Morris, I understand how this sounds. But please, at least send someone to check the area around the towers. If I'm wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right..." I let the sentence hang unfinished, the implications clear. Perhaps it was the genuine fear in my voice, or maybe the sheriff had encountered enough strange happenings in her career to keep an open mind. Whatever the reason, she eventually nodded. "I'll send Deputy Hines out that way to take a look. In the meantime, I suggest you get yourself to the medical center to have those cuts looked at." She paused, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "And if you don't mind my asking, what are your plans now?" The question caught me off guard. In the chaos of escaping the forest, I hadn't thought beyond immediate survival. I need to get to Alabama State University," I said, remembering Marcus's final instructions. "There's someone there who might be able to make sense of this." Sheriff Morris raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me further. Instead, she offered to have one of her deputies drive me to the bus station in the next town over, a kindness I gratefully accepted. As I was leaving her office, she called after me, "Ms. Whitley, whatever you saw out there, be careful who you tell about it. Strange stories have a way of following people in these parts." The journey to Alabama State University in Montgomery took the remainder of that day, a bus ride followed by a taxi to the campus. By the time I arrived, evening was falling, the academic buildings mostly empty as students and faculty headed home for the night. Finding the Department of Theoretical Physics proved challenging, but eventually I was directed to a modern building on the eastern edge of campus. Dr. Eleanor Chen's office door was closed, a note indicating her office hours had ended at 4 p.m. I was about to turn away in disappointment when I noticed light spilling from beneath the door and heard the faint sound of typing from within. Taking a deep breath, I knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 50s, with short gray-streaked hair and rectangular glasses that magnified her sharp, intelligent eyes. "Office hours are over," she said briskly. "If you're one of my students, I'll see you tomorrow at the scheduled time." "Dr. Chun, my name is Fiona Whitley. I'm not a student." I clutched Marcus's logbook tightly, suddenly aware of how disheveled and unhinged I must appear. "I need to speak with you about the Thorne Protocol." The effect of those words was immediate and profound. Dr. Chen's professional demeanor faltered, her eyes widening in shock. "Where did you hear that term?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who sent you?" "Marcus Thorne," I replied simply. "And I know how impossible that sounds, but please, just look at this." I held out the logbook, my hands trembling slightly. Everything that's happening in the Talladega forest, everything he predicted, it's all coming true. And you're the only one who can help stop it. For a long moment, Dr. Chen stood frozen in the doorway, her gaze fixed on the weathered logbook in my hands. Then, without a word, she stepped aside and gestured for me to enter her office. As she closed the door behind us, I caught a glimpse of her expression. Not skepticism or concern, but a strange combination of fear and vindication, as if I had just confirmed something she had suspected but hoped wasn't true. "So it's finally happening," she said quietly, taking the logbook from my hands and opening it with a reverence that suggested she knew exactly what it was. "After all these years." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp with sudden intensity. "Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out, not even the parts you think I won't believe." As night fell over Montgomery, I sat in Dr. Chen's cluttered office and recounted the full, unedited version of my experience in the forest. She listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes, her face growing increasingly grave as my story progressed. When I finally finished, the office had grown dark around us, the only light coming from her desk lamp and the glow of her computer screen. "My grandfather worked with Marcus Thorne," she said after a long silence. "Not at the towers, but in the research division that monitored them. The official records say it was a fire spotting network, but a small group within the Forestry Service knew the truth." She opened a drawer in her desk and removed an old photograph. A group of men in formal 1960s attire, standing before what looked like scientific equipment. The towers were built on sites of unusual electromagnetic activity, places the native tribes had marked as thin spots in the world. They were designed to contain something that had already been leaking through for centuries. Dr. Chen spread Marcus's calculations across her desk, her trained eye making sense of equations that had been incomprehensible to me. "These are brilliant," she murmured. "He's identified the fundamental flaw in the original containment system and developed a solution based on quantum entanglement principles that wouldn't be discovered until decades after his disappearance." She looked up at me, a hint of awe in her expression. 50 years trapped in that liminal space, and he used the time to solve the very problem that imprisoned him. "Can it work?" I asked, hope and exhaustion battling within me. "Can we stop whatever's happening in that forest?" Dr. Chen didn't answer immediately, her attention returning to the equations. "Theoretically, yes, but we would need resources, equipment, access to the site." She trailed off, her brow furrowing in concentration. "And we would need to act quickly. If what you described is accurate, the distortion field is expanding exponentially. Within days, it could encompass the entire forest. Within weeks." She didn't need to finish the thought. Outside her office window, the campus lights created pools of brightness in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, students were laughing, their voices carrying on the night air. Normal people living normal lives, utterly unaware of the horror gradually spreading through the forest just miles away. I thought of Marcus, who had sacrificed 50 years and ultimately his very existence trying to contain that horror. I thought of the creature I had glimpsed emerging from the column of light, its impossible form an affront to the natural order of our reality. "What do we need to do first?" I asked, straightening in my chair despite my exhaustion. "And who do we need to convince to help us?" Dr. Chen closed Marcus's logbook, her decision apparently made. "First, we need to verify that what you experienced is real. I have colleagues in the geology department who monitor seismic activity in the state. If something that's significant happened in Talladega, their instruments would have detected it." She stood, gathering the papers into a neat stack. "Then we need to contact someone at the Department of Energy. My grandfather's notes mentioned they had a classified division that dealt with unusual phenomena." As she spoke, organizing her thoughts into a plan of action, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I was no longer alone with this impossible knowledge, no longer the sole witness to an event too bizarre to be believed. In Dr. Chen, I had found not just an ally, but someone who might actually understand what we were facing. "There's one more thing you should know," Dr. Chen said, her voice taking on a solemn quality. "According to my grandfather's papers, The entities that exist in that space between dimensions, they can track those who have encountered them. They form a kind of psychic connection, especially to those who have spent time near the towers. Her gaze met mine directly. If what you experienced is real, they may be able to sense you, to follow you even here. A chill ran through me as I remembered the distorted figures emerging from the light, their alien movements as they pursued us through the transformed forest. How do we stop them from finding us? Dr. Chen moved to a bookshelf and removed a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols similar to those I had seen in the tower. My grandfather left me this. He called it a blind box, said it could mask the psychic signature of anyone who carried it. She handed it to me, the wood warm and somehow comforting against my skin. I always thought it was just a family superstition, but now, the night stretched ahead of us, filled with phone calls, explanations, plans that seemed both desperate and essential. Outside Dr. Chen's window, the normal world continued, oblivious to the thin boundary separating it from horrors beyond comprehension. That boundary was failing, stretched to breaking by forces that had waited patiently for decades. But we had Marcus's calculations, Dr. Chen's knowledge, and perhaps most importantly, the truth, however unbelievable it might seem to others. As I clutched the wooden box, its carved symbols pressing into my palm, I thought again of Marcus Thorne, a man trapped between worlds for half a century, working tirelessly to understand the very forces that had imprisoned him. In his final moments of existence, he had passed that understanding to me, trusting me to carry it forward. I couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere in that space between dimensions, he was watching, hoping we would succeed where he and others had failed. The coming days would determine whether his sacrifice had been in vain or whether we could restore the boundary between our reality and the horrors that waited just beyond the edge of perception. Until then, all I could do was move forward, one step at a time, carrying the knowledge that the world was both much larger and much more fragile than I had ever imagined. Outside, the night deepened, stars appearing in the clear Alabama sky. Somewhere to the north, in a forest now transformed beyond recognition, a blue light pulsed like a beacon, calling to things that should never enter our world. And beside me, Dr. Chun continued to work, tracing the path that might lead us back to that light, not to flee from it this time, but to face it, to contain it, to ensure that the boundary between worlds remained intact for generations to come. Whatever the outcome, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never see the world the same way again. The comfortable reality I had known was just a thin veneer, a fragile shell surrounding depths and dimensions I was only beginning to comprehend. And that knowledge, once gained, could never be unlearned, just as the horrors of the forest, once witnessed, could never be unseen. My name's Lila Hensley. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I needed a break from my dead-end office job, so when my cousin Gideon Pratt invited me to camp in Alabama's Talladega National Forest, I jumped at it. Gideon's a park ranger from Montgomery, built like a linebacker, always chasing stories about the woods. He brought along his girlfriend, Maris Boone, a quiet botanist from Huntsville who knows every plant by name. We piled into my old Subaru Outback, stuffed with sleeping bags, a stove, and way too many snacks. Gideon had this wild idea to camp near abandoned fire lookout towers, creepy old structures he swore had history. I thought it'd be a fun, spooky getaway. The drive was all laughs and bad country music, but the second we hit the forest, something felt off, like the air was too heavy. The road to the first tower was a nightmare, all ruts and rocks, my Subaru groaning with every bump. We found the tower at dusk, a rusted skeleton poking through the pines, maybe 60 feet tall, with a crumbling cabin on top. It looked like something out of a horror flick, all jagged edges and peeling paint. Maris was already sketching it in her notebook, muttering about the moss growing on its legs. Gideon was hyped, spinning tales about rangers who used to man these towers, saying some never left. I laughed, but the forest was too quiet. No birds, no breeze, just a stillness that made my skin prickle. We set up camp in a clearing nearby, pitching tents and starting a fire. The tower loomed over us, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching. We sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows, and Gideon got into his stories again. He mentioned old reports of rangers seeing things in Talladega, lights in the trees, figures that vanished when you looked twice. Maris rolled her eyes, saying it was just overworked guys hallucinating. I sided with her, but I kept glancing at the tower, its silhouette sharp against the stars. The air felt thick, like it was pressing on my chest. I tried to joke about it, saying the tower looked like it was ready to walk off, but nobody laughed. Gideon suggested climbing it tomorrow for a view, and Maris agreed, her curiosity outweighing her skepticism. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill. As the fire died down, I noticed a smell, sharp, like rotting fruit, but faint. I figured it was just the forest, maybe some dead animal nearby. Maris sniffed the air too, frowning, but said nothing. We decided to sleep in shifts, just to keep the fire going. I took first watch, sitting with a flashlight and a can of soda, trying to stay calm. The tower's cabin windows were black, but every so often, I swore I saw a flicker, like a reflection. My mind went to scary campfire tales from when I was a kid, the kind that keep you up all night. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But that smell got stronger, and the quiet felt wrong, like the forest was holding something back. I woke Gideon for his shift, my hands shaky as I handed him the flashlight. He teased me for being jumpy, but I noticed he kept his hunting knife close. Maris was asleep, her notebook open to a sketch of the tower, detailed down to the rust stains. I crawled into my tent, zipping it tight, but sleep didn't come easy. That smell was still there, creeping through the canvas, and I heard something, a faint tapping, like fingers on metal. It was coming from the tower. I held my breath, listening, but it stopped. My heart was racing, and I gripped my pocket knife, feeling like a kid scared of the dark. The forest was too still, too alive, and I knew this wasn't just a camping trip anymore. Morning broke, gray and damp, the kind of dawn that makes everything look bleak. The smell was gone, but the air felt heavier, like a storm was coming. Gideon was already up, poking at the fire, his face tense. Maris was checking her sketches, saying the tower's moss looked unnatural, whatever that meant. We ate granola bars in silence, the mood sour. I suggested packing up and heading home, but Gideon was stubborn, saying we hadn't even climbed the tower yet. Maris backed him, her eyes bright with that botanist curiosity. I didn't push back, but I should have. That was my first mistake, letting them talk me into staying. The tower stood there, silent but menacing, like it was daring us to come closer. We packed light and hiked to the tower's base, the ground soft with pine needles. The ladder was rickety, missing rungs, but Gideon went up first, fearless as always. Maris followed, her notebook tucked in her pack. I hesitated, my gut screaming to stay on the ground, but I climbed anyway, the metal creaking under my weight. The higher we got, the worse that smell came back, sharp and sour, like it was coming from the cabin itself. At the top, the view was stunning, miles of green, no sign of civilization, but it felt wrong, like we were trespassing. Gideon pointed out another tower in the distance, barely visible. "Let's check that one next," he said. I wanted to say no, but Maris was already nodding. The cabin was a wreck, broken glass, rotted wood, and that smell, so strong it made my eyes water. Maris crouched, examining the floor, and froze. "This isn't moss," she whispered, pointing to a dark, slimy patch that pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. My stomach twisted. It wasn't natural, not even close. Gideon laughed it off, saying it was just mold, but his voice was shaky. I backed toward the ladder, ready to bolt, when I heard that tapping again, louder, faster, coming from inside the walls. The air shifted, colder, and I swear the cabin felt smaller, like it was closing in. This was no ghost story. Something horror-filled was here, and we were standing right in its heart. We climbed down fast, nobody talking. Back at camp, the mood was grim. Gideon tried to play it cool, but he kept glancing at the tower. Maris was scribbling in her notebook, her hands trembling. I wanted to leave, but Gideon insisted on checking the other tower, saying we'd come too far to quit. I argued, my voice louder than I meant, but Maris sided with him, muttering about needing samples of that moss. My gut was screaming, but I gave in, thinking we'd be quick. That was mistake number 2. As we packed to hike to the next tower, that smell followed us, and I noticed the trees. Their bark looked wrong, like it was peeling in patterns, almost like faces. The forest was waking up, and it didn't want us here. The hike to the second tower was a slog, the trail choked with roots and thorns that seemed to grab at us. That sour smell followed, sticking in my throat, and I couldn't shake the memory of that pulsing moss in the first tower. Gideon led the way, his machete hacking at vines, but his usual confidence seemed forced. Maris was quieter than ever, clutching her notebook like a shield, muttering about needing to analyze that slime. My Subaru was parked a mile back, and I was already regretting not turning around. The forest felt tighter, the trees leaning in, their bark still peeling in those eerie, face-like patterns. It was horror creeping up slow, like realizing you're lost in a place that doesn't want you found. I kept my knife in my hand, just in case. We hit a problem fast. Gideon's map, a crumpled thing he'd printed from some ranger database, was useless. The trail it showed didn't match the one we were on. Landmarks like a forked oak or a creek were nowhere, and my phone's GPS was dead, just a spinning wheel. Maris tried her compass, but the needle twitched like it was drunk. "This place is messed up," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. Gideon grunted, saying we were close, but his eyes kept darting to the trees. That smell was stronger now, almost choking, and I noticed the ground, soft, like it was breathing under my boots. My mind went to scary stories about cursed woods, places that trap you. I wanted to bolt, but we were too deep. Halfway to the tower, Maris stopped dead, staring at a tree. Its bark wasn't just peeling, it was carved, deep scratches forming symbols I didn't recognize, like jagged runes. "These are fresh," she whispered, tracing one with her finger. Gideon brushed it off as vandals, but his hand tightened on his machete. I saw more carvings on other trees, circling us, and my gut twisted. This wasn't kids with knives, it was something else, something disturbing. I remembered a documentary about ancient sites, how some places hold onto old rituals. These marks felt like that, wrong, like a warning we were ignoring. I suggested turning back, but Gideon snapped, saying we'd come for answers. That was his mistake, pushing us forward. The second tower came into view, worse than the first. It was leaning, half its ladder gone, the cabin at the top sagging like a broken jaw. That smell was unbearable now, pouring from the tower itself. Maris was obsessed, climbing a few rungs to get a better look, saying the moss was up there too. I grabbed her ankle, begging her to stop, but she shook me off, her eyes wild. Gideon backed her, saying we needed to know what it was. I hated this plan, but I followed, my legs heavy. The ladder groaned under us, and that tapping from last night was back, sharp, rhythmic, coming from the cabin. The horror was building, and I knew we were walking into something we couldn't handle. At the top, the cabin was a rotting mess, floorboards splintered, walls slick with that pulsing slime. It wasn't moss, it moved, rippling like a heartbeat. Maris reached for it, but I yanked her back, my heart pounding. "Don't touch it," I hissed. She glared, but then we heard it, a low moan, not human, from somewhere below the floor. Gideon froze, his machete raised. The tapping stopped, replaced by a scratching, like nails on wood, coming from inside the walls. My mind flashed to those runes, the smell, the forest itself. This wasn't just scary, it was wrong, like we'd stumbled into a place that wasn't meant for us. We needed to get out, but Maris was still staring at the slime, transfixed. We climbed down fast, the ladder shaking like it might collapse. Back on the ground, the forest was different, darker, the air colder, like it was angry. Gideon suggested heading back to the Subaru, finally admitting this was too much. But Maris hesitated, saying she needed a sample of that slime for her research. I wanted to scream at her, "Research? Now." That was her mistake, thinking this was just science. I noticed the trees again. Those carved runes were glowing faintly, like embers. The smell was choking, and the moan from the tower followed us, louder now, echoing through the pines. Something was waking up, and we were right in its path. As we started back, the trail seemed to twist, leading us in circles. The runes were everywhere, on every tree, pulsing in sync with that moan. Gideon's machete was useless. The vines we cut grew back, thicker, like the forest was fighting us. I kept hearing whispers, not words, but feelings, like fear and hunger, pressing into my head. Maris was scribbling in her notebook, frantic, saying the slime was alive. I grabbed her arm. yelling to focus, but she was lost in it. Gideon was ahead, hacking at branches, but his swings were wild, panicked. The horror was real now, closing in, and I knew we'd made a terrible choice coming here. We found a clearing, but it wasn't ours. No Subaru, no camp, just a circle of trees, their runes glowing brighter. The moan was a growl now, coming from the ground itself. I saw something move in the distance, a shape, low and slinking, like a wolf but wrong, its limbs too long. My breath caught, the fear so thick I could taste it. Gideon saw it too, his face pale. "What is that?" he whispered. Maris didn't answer, still writing, like she didn't see the danger. I grabbed her notebook, tossing it into the dirt. "We're leaving," I said, but the shape was closer, and more were joining it. The forest was alive, and it was hunting us. The air was buzzing now, like static, and those shapes were circling, their eyes glinting yellow in the dark. I remembered a ghost story my grandma told me, about spirits that guard sacred places, punishing trespassers. This felt like that, but worse, more primal, more cruel. Gideon pulled Maris toward what he thought was the trail, but I wasn't sure anymore. The runes pulsed faster, the growl louder, and I felt like the forest was inside my head, telling me to stay. My knife felt useless, my hands shaking. We were lost, surrounded, and those things were closing in. The horror was no longer a question. It was here, and we were running out of time. Those shapes were closing in, their yellow eyes cutting through the dusk like knives. The growl from the ground was louder, shaking my bones, and the air buzzed with that sour smell, thick as poison. I grabbed Maris, yanking her from her trance, but she fought me, screaming about her notebook. "It's evidence," she yelled, her voice cracking. Gideon swung his machete at the air, like he could scare off whatever was out there. The shapes, low, slinking, with limbs that bent wrong, weren't phased. They weren't animals. They were something else, something horror-filled that made my skin crawl. The runes on the trees pulsed brighter, like a heartbeat, and I knew we'd crossed a line. This wasn't just scary anymore. It was wrong, like the forest itself was alive and angry. I shoved Maris toward Gideon, shouting, "Run!" The shapes moved, darting between trees, too fast to track. We bolted, branches clawing at my face, the ground soft and sucking at my boots. The growl turned into a screech, high and piercing, like nails on a chalkboard. My mind flashed to a horror movie I saw once, Annihilation, where the forest itself was the monster. This felt like that, but real, and we were the prey. Gideon was ahead, his machete hacking wildly, but the vines seemed to regrow, blocking our path. Maris was stumbling, her eyes wide, muttering about the slime, knowing us. I didn't want to hear it. Those things were close, their eyes everywhere, and the forest was helping them. We hit a dead end, a wall of thorns, thick as a fence, runes carved into every stem. Gideon swore, swinging his machete, but it barely dented the tangle. The shapes were behind us now, their screeches mixing with that buzz in the air. I saw one clearly for the first time, tall, hunched, its body covered in that pulsing slime, eyes like glowing coals. My heart stopped. It wasn't just disturbing, it was unnatural, like something spit out of a nightmare. I grabbed a stick, useless but better than nothing, and yelled at Gideon to find a way through. He was panicking, his swing sloppy, and Maris was frozen, staring at the creature like she was hypnotized. That was her mistake, stopping when we needed to move. I pulled Maris back, shaking her hard. "Wake up," I screamed. She blinked, but her face was blank, like something had gotten inside her head. Gideon found a gap in the thorns, barely wide enough, and we squeezed through, scraping our arms bloody. The shapes didn't follow, they just watched, their screeches echoing. The forest was darker now, the runes glowing so bright they burned my eyes. The air felt alive, pressing down, whispering my name. "Lila, Lila, Lila." My chest tightened, the horror sinking in. These things knew us, knew our fears, and they were playing with us. I kept thinking of those rangers Gideon mentioned, the ones who never left. Were they taken like this? We stumbled into another clearing, and there was the second tower, its rusted frame leaning worse than before. The cabin at the top was dripping with that slime, oozing down the legs like blood. The screech was deafening now, coming from everywhere, trees, ground, air. I saw more shapes, not just one but dozens, circling the clearing. Gideon climbed the ladder, yelling for us to follow, thinking height would save us. I hesitated, my gut screaming it was a trap, but Maris was already climbing, her hands slipping on the rungs. I went after her, the metal creaking, that smell choking me. The horror was real now. This tower wasn't safety. It was their territory, and we'd walked right in. Up top, the cabin was worse than I'd imagined. The slime was everywhere, pulsing, covering the walls, the floor, even the broken windows. It moved like it was alive, reaching for us. Gideon gagged, his machete shaking in his hand. Maris reached out, like she was going to touch it again, and I slapped her hand away. "Are you crazy?" I yelled. That's when we heard it. A voice, not human, coming from the slime itself. It whispered our names, low and hungry, like it was tasting them. My legs went weak. This wasn't just a forest or a tower. It was something else, something ancient and cruel, and we were stuck in its grip. The shapes were climbing now, their claws scraping the tower's legs. The ladder shook, bolts popping loose, and I knew it wouldn't hold. Gideon swung his machete at the slime, but it just oozed around the blade, unaffected. Maris was crying, muttering about how the slime was alive, aware. I wanted to scream at her to shut up, but I was too scared. The air was buzzing so loud it hurt, and the runes outside were blazing, lighting up the forest like a warning. My mind raced to every scary story I'd ever heard, about places you don't come back from. This was one of those places, and we were trapped, surrounded by something that wanted more than our lives. I looked for a way out, but the ladder was our only shot, and those things were on it. The slime in the cabin was moving faster, stretching toward us like fingers. Gideon grabbed my arm, his face pale. "We jump," he said, pointing to a tree close to the tower. It was insane, 40 feet up, maybe more, but staying was worse. Maris was shaking, her eyes locked on the slime, like it was calling her. I yanked her toward the edge, but she pulled back, whispering, "It knows me." My heart sank. The horror was in her now, and I didn't know how to save her. The shapes were at the cabin door, their eyes glowing, and the tower groaned like it was collapsing. The slime lunged, a tendril wrapping around Maris's ankle. She screamed, a sound so raw it cut through me. Gideon hacked at it, but the slime just reformed, stronger. I grabbed Maris's arm, pulling with everything I had, but the slime was winning, dragging her toward the center of the cabin. The shapes were inside now, their bodies slick with that same ooze, their eyes locked on us. The air was thick with their whispers, a chorus of hunger and rage. We were out of time, the tower shaking, the slime closing in. I looked at Gideon, his face set, and knew we had to make a move. Jump or fight. It was life or death, and the forest was ready to swallow us whole. The slime was pulling Maris, its tendril tied around her ankle, and her screams were tearing me apart. I yanked at her arm, my muscles burning, while Gideon swung his machete, slicing at the ooze. It didn't work. The slime just split and reformed, like it was mocking us. The shapes were in the cabin now, their yellow eyes glowing, bodies slick with that pulsing goo. The tower shook, bolts snapping, and the air buzzed with their whispers, our names, over and over. My heart was pounding, the horror so thick I could barely think. I remembered a news story about a hiker in Talladega, found covered in strange burns, no explanation. This was that, but worse. "Jump," I yelled at Gideon, pointing to the tree. It was our only shot, crazy or not. Gideon nodded, grabbing Maris's other arm. We pulled together, but the slime was stronger, stretching toward her like it was alive. She was crying, saying it knew her, her voice hollow. I hated it, but we had to let go or we'd all go down. "Maris, fight it," I screamed, but her eyes were glassy, like she was already gone. The shapes lunged, their claws grazing my jacket, cold as ice. Gideon kicked at one, his boots sinking into its slimy body. The tower groaned, leaning hard, and I knew it was collapsing. We had no choice. I grabbed Gideon, shoving him toward the edge. "Now," I yelled. We leapt for the tree, branches scratching my face, the horror of leaving Maris ripping me apart. We hit the tree, clinging to branches that cracked under our weight. I looked back. The cabin was a writhing mass of slime. Maris's screams cut off as the shapes swarmed her. The tower buckled, crashing into the forest with a deafening roar. My stomach lurched, tears stinging my eyes. We'd lost her. Gideon was shaking, blood dripping from a cut on his arm. The shapes were down there, their eyes locked on us, but they didn't climb. The slime was spreading, oozing across the ground, and that buzz was deafening, like a swarm in my head. We had to get to the Subaru, a mile away, but the forest was alive, vines twisting like they wanted to trap us. We slid down the tree, hitting the ground hard. My knee screamed, but I ran, Gideon right behind me. The shapes followed, gliding through the trees, their screeches mixing with the buzz. The runes on the trees were blazing now, lighting the forest like a nightmare. I kept thinking of The Thing, that movie where the monster becomes what it touches. This felt like that, but the whole damn forest was the monster. We dodged roots that seemed to rise on purpose, tripping us. Gideon's machete was gone, lost in the jump, and my knife felt useless. The Subaru was our only hope, but the trail was gone, the forest shifting, leading us in circles. We were running for our lives, and it wasn't enough. We stumbled into a clearing, and I saw it. The Subaru, parked where we'd left it. Hope surged, but the shapes were closer, their slime dripping from the trees. I fumbled for the keys, my hands slick with sweat, and unlocked the doors. Gideon dove into the passenger seat, yelling, "Go, go!" I jumped in, the engine roaring to life. A shape lunged, its claws scraping the hood, leaving deep gashes. I floored it, tires spinning on pine needles, the buzz so loud it shook the car. The shapes didn't chase, but their eyes followed us, glowing in the dark. My heart was in my throat, the horror of Maris's screams echoing in my head. We weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. The dirt road was a mess, rocks banging the undercarriage. Gideon was silent, his face gray, clutching his bleeding arm. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting those things to appear. The buzz was fading, but the air still felt wrong, like the forest was letting us go, but not really. I remembered a time I got lost hiking as a kid, how the woods seemed to watch me. This was that, times 1,000, cruel, alive, hungry. The Subaru's headlights caught a sign for the highway, and I pushed the gas harder, praying we'd make it. The shapes were gone, but the slime was on the road now, slick and pulsing, slowing us down. We were escaping, but it felt like a trap. The highway was close, its lights flickering through the trees. I swerved around a patch of slime, the car fishtailing. Gideon grabbed the wheel, helping me steady it. "We're almost there," he whispered, but his voice was shaky. The buzz was back, softer but insistent, like it was inside us now. I saw something in the mirror, a shape, low and slinking, keeping pace. My stomach dropped. We hit the highway, asphalt under the tires, and I floored it, cars honking as we swerved into traffic. The shape vanished, but the buzz lingered, and Gideon's arm was worse, the cut turning black, oozing that same slime. We were out, but the horror wasn't done with us. We pulled into a gas station, the neon lights harsh after the dark. Gideon was breathing hard, his arms swollen, the slime spreading under his skin. I wanted to cry, but I held it together, banging on the gas station door for help. The clerk called 911, his eyes wide as he saw Gideon's arm. The buzz was faint now, but I felt it in my chest, like a warning. We'd escaped the forest, but at what cost? Maris was gone, and Gideon was fading. The shapes hadn't followed, but their slime was in him, and I knew this wasn't over. The highway stretched behind us, leading back to Talladega, and I felt the forest's pull, like it was calling us back. We waited for the ambulance, the night air cold against my scratched-up arms. Gideon was muttering, saying the slime knew him, just like Maris had. My heart sank. We'd fought to escape, but the forest was still winning, its grip tightening even here. The horror was real, and we were in a life-and-death fight, not just with those shapes, but with whatever they'd left in us. I looked at the road, half expecting to see those yellow eyes. We'd made it out, but it didn't feel like freedom. The forest was patient, and I knew it was waiting for its next move. The ambulance came, lights flashing, and paramedics rushed Gideon onto a stretcher. His arm was worse, the slime moving like veins under his skin, black and pulsing. I tried to explain, but the words, towers, shapes, slime, sounded crazy. The paramedics thought it was an infection, maybe from a cut, but I knew better. That buzz was still in my head, faint but there, whispering my name. I sat in the gas station, clutching a coffee the clerk gave me, my hands shaking. The horror of it all hit me. Maris, gone in that tower, and Gideon slipping away. I kept thinking of old ghost stories about cursed places that take pieces of you. Talladega had taken more than that, and we'd let it. I followed the ambulance to a hospital in Birmingham, sitting in the waiting room as they worked on Gideon. My phone was dead, but I kept seeing those runes in my mind, glowing, alive. A doctor came out, her face grim. Gideon's arm was beyond saving. The infection was spreading too fast. They'd have to amputate, but even then, she wasn't sure. I nodded, numb, the horror sinking deeper. I remembered Maris's obsession with the slime, how she'd wanted to study it. That was her mistake, thinking she could understand it. And Gideon, he'd pushed us to keep going, ignoring the signs. That was his. Mine was not dragging them out sooner, thinking we could handle a spooky camping trip. They let me see Gideon before surgery. He was pale, hooked to machines, his eyes half open. "It's still here," he whispered, his voice weak. I looked at his arm. The slime was moving, forming those same runes we'd seen on the trees. My stomach churned. It wasn't just in him, it was part of him now. I wanted to scream, to burn that forest down, but I just held his hand, tears falling. The buzz was louder now, in my head, like it was laughing. I thought of Maris, how the slime took her, how she'd screamed. This was our tragedy, thinking we could walk into a place like that and come out whole. The surgery didn't work. Gideon crashed on the table, the doctors saying the infection spread to his heart. They couldn't explain it, called it a freak case. I knew the truth. That forest, those towers, that slime. It wasn't natural. It was something older, crueler, tied to the land. I drove back to Knoxville. The Subaru's hood still scratched from those claws. The buzz followed me, faint but constant, like a reminder. I kept seeing Gideon's face, Maris's screams, those yellow eyes. The hospital gave me Gideon's things, a watch, his wallet, and a scrap of paper with a rune drawn on it, like he'd been writing it before the end. My heart stopped. It was in him, and maybe in me too. I'm home now, but I don't sleep. The buzz is always there, louder at night, and I swear I see shapes outside my window, low, slinking, watching. I burned the paper with the rune, but it's in my head, glowing like it did in the forest. I keep thinking about what we did wrong, not turning back, touching the slime, ignoring the warnings. It's like a horror movie, but there's no credits, no escape. Talladega took Maris, took Gideon, and left me with this fear, guilt, and that buzz that won't quit. I check my skin every day, looking for black veins, for slime. Nothing yet, but I know it's coming. I called the ranger station, told them to close off those towers. They didn't listen, said it was just a bad trip, maybe drugs. I wanted to scream, drugs don't carve runes, don't kill your friends. I found one of Maris's sketches in my bag, one she'd done of the slime. It wasn't just a drawing. It moved, faintly, like it was alive. I burned it, but the image is stuck in me. The forest let me go, but it's not done. Those shapes, that slime, they're waiting, patient, and I feel them watching, even here. I'll never go back, but I know they'll find me. The worst part? I saw a news report yesterday. Another hiker missing in Talladega, near the towers. They found his gear, covered in slime, no body. My hands shook as I watched, the buzz roaring in my ears. I keep my knife by my bed now, but it's useless. The horror followed me home, in my head, maybe in my blood. We thought we were camping, just chasing a thrill, but we walked into something ancient, something that doesn't forgive. Maris and Gideon paid the price, and I'm next. I can feel it, waiting, whispering my name. I don't go outside much anymore. The trees outside my apartment look wrong, their bark peeling like it did in Talladega. I hear the buzz every night, see those yellow eyes in my dreams. I keep thinking about our mistakes, Maris's obsession, Gideon's stubbornness, my silence. We should have run at the first sign, but we didn't, and now they're gone. The tragedy isn't just losing them, it's knowing I brought it home. The slime, the shapes, the forest, they're part of me now, and I can't escape. I'm marked, and it's only a matter of time before they come for me. Sometimes, I wake up with scratches on my arms, shallow but real, like something touched me in my sleep. I don't know if it's them or my own nails, but the fear is constant. Talladega wasn't just a place, it was a trap, and we walked right in. The horror isn't over, it's waiting, patient, cruel. I keep Maris's last sketch in my mind, the slime pulsing, and I know it's still out there, in those towers, in the forest, in me. We lost everything, and all I have left is this story, a warning nobody will believe. But it's real, and it's coming.